Chapter 1793. The disciples of the true sages gradually regained their senses. Finally, they sensed the passage of time and their faces darkened. It's actually been 30 million years. Qing Longzi muttered as his eyes flashed with fear and displeasure. What does heaven and earth mean? After torturing us for 30 million years, they let us go? Why didn't they just kill us? Another disciple of the true sage asked curiously. To heaven and earth, hatred is meaningless. Even if we have already caused great damage to heaven and earth, as long as it can bring more benefits to heaven and earth, it will definitely let us go, Qing Longzi said. So that's how it is. At this moment, the disciples of the true sages finally understood why heaven and earth wanted to torture them for 30 million years. The fundamental reason for this was that the life-saving method that the true saint had bestowed upon them was of unimaginable value. Even to heaven and earth, what heaven and earth wanted to do was to keep the power of these life-saving techniques in heaven and earth. As for killing them, although it was beneficial for living beings to take revenge, it was just a waste of power for heaven and earth. It still needed them to create power in heaven and earth to help it grow. After understanding this, all of their expressions became very complicated. An inexplicable sense of awe gradually emerged from the bottom of their hearts. This was the first time they had such a feeling towards heaven and earth. In the past, heaven and earth were inanimate objects to them. No matter how strong it was, they would not take it seriously. But now, they realized that the spiritual intelligence of heaven and earth, it actually had the aura of a true sage. To them, who had always lived under the shadow of a true sage, this was a great stimulation. It was stronger than any other living beings. Just as they were secretly in awe, the void moved slightly. A figure gradually appeared in front of them. This figure was none other than Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan looked at the many rank 9 pseudo-sages with an inexplicable gaze and said, "It seems like my deduction was right. You guys really managed to escape at this time." "What do you want?" Qing Longzi snorted and said coldly. As she spoke, she had already taken out her magic treasure. It hovered above Luo Fan's head, trembling slightly, ready to pounce and attack Luo Fan at any moment. At this moment, the other pseudo-martial saints also recovered from their shock and summoned their artifacts or had them hover beside them, or hovering above his head. Some even appeared beneath his feet, facing Luo Fan from afar. Another grand war could break out at any time. Luo Fan looked at them and said indifferently, "Do you still think that you can go against me?" Luo Fan looked at them. He said calmly. Hearing this, everyone's expression changed. "What do you mean?" Azure Dragon's son shouted. "No matter how strong he is, he's just a pseudo-sage without any life-saving means. He was only a 9th stage pseudo-sage. Even if I were to use a 10,000th of my strength, it would be enough to finish you all off," Luo Fan said indifferently. His words caused everyone's faces to turn incomparably ugly. The experience of being oppressed to the point where they couldn't refute was something they had never experienced before. There was no need to mention how much stimulation this had on their minds. If it weren't for the fact that they couldn't win, they might have already pounced on Luo Fan and killed him. "What do you want?" Azure Dragon's son said coldly. "You've schemed against me so many times. If I don't pay the price, I won't feel at ease," Luo Fan said indifferently. His words caused everyone to raise their guard even further. An indescribable sense of solemnity and killing intent appeared in their eyes. "So, you really want to fight us?" Azure Dragon's son said with a serious expression. At this moment, she did not say that they were the disciples of a true saint and that they had the backing of a true saint. If they were to lose their temper, what would they do? From this point, it could be seen that they had made great progress compared to before. Don't think that we only have life-saving means. We are the true disciples of a true sage. At this moment, a stage 9 pseudo-sage shouted. At this moment, the aura on his body started to surge, and a powerful force was released from his body. It directly covered the entire heaven and earth. At this moment, there was a sudden loud clap of thunder in the sky. This thunderous sound was so terrifying that it contained some sort of indescribable power. At the moment when the thunderous sound was heard, the disciple of the true sage felt pain in his body. He almost lost control of his body as he staggered and almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, at this moment, his instincts were activated and he instantly stabilized his body. This was how he avoided falling into a sorry state. However, even though he managed to avoid being in the most sorry state, such a change still affected him quite a bit, causing him to appear to be in a more sorry state than before. I see. It seems like you've all been branded by heaven and earth. Luo Fan revealed a faint smile at this moment. As soon as he said this, the indistinct feeling of being targeted by the crowd completely disappeared. He looked like a completely harmless person. What do you mean? Qing Longzi and the rest all had a look of confusion on their faces. They were naturally very clear about being branded by the heavens and earth, but they had no idea what it meant when they were put together. As the disciples of a true sage, they had always been the ones who dealt with others. They had never been dealt with by others before. Moreover, the one who dealt with them was a perfect heaven and earth that had already passed the 8th tribulation of heaven and earth. This was even more rare. Under such circumstances, they didn't understand their current loading at all, and they didn't understand why Luo Fan would say such a thing. Haha, what do you mean? You guys can figure it out yourselves. Luo Fan laughed, and his body gradually became blurry. In the end, he turned into an illusory shadow. Then, he completely disappeared and became impossible to find. What do you mean? Make yourself clear before you leave. Qing Longzi shouted. As she spoke, she activated her Dharma treasure and shot a beam of light toward the place where Luo Fan had disappeared. She wanted to stop Luo Fan from disappearing. However, at this moment, a thunderous sound came from the sky again. With this sound, the beam of light that was shot out by the Dharma treasure shook and disappeared completely in the blink of an eye. It melted into heaven and earth and could no longer be found. How is this possible? Qing Longzi turned pale with fright. When the thunderous sound rang out just now, not only did the power of the Dharma treasure dissipate, but her body and mind also suffered an unimaginable impact. She felt as if she had died once. She almost disappeared completely. She had also melted into heaven and earth. This situation gave her an extremely ominous premonition. She was no longer in the mood to care about Luo Fan's departure. At this moment, the expressions of the other rank 9 pseudo-sages under the true sage's tutelage also changed slightly, and a worried look appeared on their faces. Our powers seem to be restricted. The disciple of the true sage, who was previously in a sorry state after being shaken by the thunderous sound, said with an extremely ugly expression. Restricted? Qing Longzi's eyes narrowed. She pointed at her Dharma treasure. The Dharma treasure instantly glowed, and an inexplicable power began to increase gradually. Finally, at a certain moment, she activated the power of the Dharma treasure and blasted it forward. At this moment, another thunderous sound exploded in the void. It made her feel as if she had died once again. As expected, we've already been branded by the world. Qing Longzi's expression suddenly became aghast, and even more sorrowful. Being branded by heaven and earth was equivalent to being refined by heaven and earth. Everything about them no longer belonged to them. They had completely become a part of heaven and earth. This was simply like being treated like a pet or a Dharma treasure. Even for an ordinary person, they would definitely feel extremely unhappy because of this. Moreover, the people who were facing such a fate were the true sage disciples who were high above. At this moment, the expressions on their faces turned extremely ugly. Even their breathing became much heavier. Their eyes were slightly red, as if they were about to spit out flames. I don't believe it. One of the true sage disciples shouted. With this shout, his power exploded, and he punched the rule of law of the space-time in front of him. At this moment, a loud, crackling sound exploded above the head of the true sage's disciple. With this loud, thunderous sound, the entire body of the true sage disciple exploded instantly. It turned into a strange fog and began to gradually integrate into the void, Oh no. The other true sage disciples were all extremely shocked. Rays of light exploded from their bodies and quickly shot towards the fog that the true sage disciple had turned into. With the insertion of these rays of light, the fog that the true sage disciple had turned into started to churn and condense rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had already condensed into his body. However, as compared to before, his aura was much weaker now. It was as if he had suffered a serious illness. That was close. I almost died, and my soul was scattered. The true sage disciple revealed an extremely fearful expression, and his eyes were filled with fear. It seems like the matter has been confirmed. Once we have any actions that destroy this heaven and earth, or the exertion of our power has reached a certain limit, this heaven and earth will take action to eliminate our power. It might even directly dissolve our bodies and make us disappear completely. Qing Longzi said with an ugly expression. So that's how it is. Qiu Daozi and the rest looked at each other, and their faces were filled with fear and sorrow. Then what should we do now? We have already used up all our methods to protect ourselves. If we continue to be restricted like this, won't we accidentally die in the future? Another true sage disciple muttered, "Leave this heaven and earth." Qing Longzi clenched his teeth and said, "Leave this heaven and earth." Everyone's eyes suddenly flashed with a ray of hope. This heaven and earth had completely restricted their power and methods. In this place, their danger level had reached the level of sheep entering a pride of lions. If they continued to stay here, it would obviously not be what they wanted. In comparison, leaving this heaven and earth was obviously a better choice. In comparison, leaving this heaven and earth was obviously a better choice. However, our master asked us to cultivate in this heaven and earth until the next calamity of heaven and earth. If we leave now, we will be going against our master's orders, one of the true sage disciples said. His words made all the disciples of the true saint stunned. In the eyes of the true sage disciples, the true sage was many times more respected than the other cultivators. Towards the true sage's orders, even if it seemed to be extremely untimely, they did not have any resistance or the courage to go against it. Perhaps Master and the rest have already expected this. This is just a test of our courage, Qing Longzi said reluctantly. In reality, she could not even convince herself with these words. However, at this moment, she had to say such a reason. This was because if they stayed in this heaven and earth, it would be too dangerous and humiliating for them. This was even to the extent that she wanted to think of ways to distort the true sage's orders in order to leave. Because of this, she said such words just now. That's right. This must be a test given to us by Master. Another true sage disciple seemed to be grabbing onto the last straw. He shouted loudly. Hearing this, the other true sage disciples showed a look of hesitation. However, no matter how they thought about it, they still did not want to stay in this heaven and earth where they could be completely destroyed at any time. An indescribable determination appeared in their eyes. If that's the case, then, how should we leave this heaven and earth? Obviously, the method we use to enter this heaven and earth can't be used anymore, Qiu Daozi said. We open another passage from the place we came in from, Qing Longzi said directly. With all of our powers, although we can't open a passage that is comparable to the one that Master and the rest had, it should not be a problem for us to form that passage. Everyone tacitly did not say anything about the true sage's gist of intents. All of them nodded without hesitation and quickly headed towards the depths of this heaven and earth. With the treasures given by the true sage, although they were only stage 9 pseudo-sages, they could all break through the shackles of this heaven and earth. They could pass through the layers of laws and arrive at the deepest part of the heaven and earth, in front of the barrier between the heaven and earth and the state of chaos. 4 stage 9 pseudo-sages, even ordinary stage 9 pseudo-sages, they would definitely be able to find a place that they had been to once. Moreover, these stage 9 pseudo-sages were all extremely powerful disciples of true sages. They were many times stronger than ordinary stage 9 pseudo-sages. Therefore, very soon, they found their destination. It was the place where Luo Fan had first met them. This is the place. As long as we open a space-time passage here, we will be able to return to the main heaven and earth, Qing Longzi said excitedly. Just as they were excitedly planning to leave this heaven and earth, Luo Fan and the Air Maiden were looking down at them from a certain level of this heaven and earth. The Air Maiden looked at them for a while and asked curiously, "Are we going to let them go just like that? I'm not the one dealing with them now, but the heaven and earth. Do you think the heaven and earth will let them leave with such a good source of energy?" Luo Fan smiled faintly. The Air Maiden came to a realization when she heard this. She smiled and said, "I see. Indeed, if I were the heaven and earth, I wouldn't let them leave with such a highly efficient source of energy. Just wait and see. Very soon, they will know how it feels to be branded by the heaven and earth," Luo Fan said faintly. The Air Maiden nodded with a smile. After laughing for a while, the Air Maiden's expression suddenly changed. She said, "They won't be able to leave this heaven and earth after being branded. Then what about us? What about us?" Luo Fan frowned. "Could we have been branded as well?" asked the Air Maiden with a nervous expression. The process of the heaven and earth branding the disciples of the true saints was really strange and hidden. Even Luo Fan and the Air Maiden did not know what the process was, let alone the existence of the brand. Under such circumstances, how could they be sure that the heaven and earth had not branded them? How could they be sure that they were completely free at this time? The Air Maiden could not help but shudder when she thought that they might also fall into the same miserable situation as the disciples of the true saints. Luo Fan frowned and thought carefully before saying, "We don't have to worry at all. We are completely different from them." "Different?" The Air Maiden frowned. "We are truly independent. No matter what, we can sense anything that falls on us, even if it's the brand of the heaven and earth," Luo Fan said faintly. "Even if it is the mark of this world," Luo Fan said indifferently. The brand of the heaven and earth was at most on the same level as the brand of the sage, Luo Fan said faintly. "Even if it's the brand of the heaven and earth," Luo Fan said faintly. The brand of the heaven and earth was at most at the same level as the brand of the sage. Under such circumstances, how could the brand of the heaven and earth of the same level be branded into his body without him sensing it? Chapter 1794. Hearing Luo Fan's affirmation, the air hostess was relieved. Although Luo Fan's imprint in this world had been destroyed when the world had gone through the great trial of heaven and earth, he was, after all, the one who had created this world. To this world, he was still different. Therefore, compared to anyone else, the air hostess trusted Luo Fan's judgment more. In fact, she trusted him more than she trusted herself. At this moment, the disciples of the true saints had already started to take action. They surrounded the place where the passageway had been opened. They adjusted their state, used their power, and used their magic treasures. They were communicating with each other in an indescribable manner. Then, everyone shouted in unison. Waves of powerful energy erupted from their bodies and poured into the magic treasures beside them. As the waves of energy poured into them, the magic treasures began to shine one by one. Then, whether it was spiritual light, power, or some kind of space-time, or some kind of world, these magic treasures each released their mysterious power and blasted toward the center where they were surrounding. In other words, they had determined that it was the place that led to the Earth's universe. Under this bombardment, the barrier began to shake violently. Waves of ripples began to spread out in all directions. As they reverberated and clashed, the impact became stronger and stronger. At this moment, a huge dark cloud suddenly began to condense above everyone's head. How was this possible? Qing Longzi and the rest were shocked. This place was already in the unseen world. In this place, even time and space no longer existed. How could there be dark clouds gathering here? However, the truth was the truth. No matter how much they refused to believe it, the dark clouds had already appeared above their heads. Then, they began to accumulate terrifying power. All sorts of muffled booms came from the dark clouds, faintly shaking the surroundings. The great way in the unseen world also began to tremble slightly, as if it could not withstand the pressure of the dark clouds. Come on, before these attacks land, we must open the passageway. We have to open the passageway. Xiao Daozi shouted at this moment. This shout caused everyone to snap out of their daze. One by one, they began to pour even more power into their magic treasures, causing them to explode with even more power than before to bombard the barrier. As the bombardment continued, the distortion of the barrier began to increase rapidly. Finally, at a certain moment, tiny cracks finally appeared on the barrier. Just at this moment, the dark clouds above suddenly produced an earth-shattering tremor. Countless bolts of lightning fell from the sky like rain, directly pouncing towards the many disciples of the true sage. The speed of the lightning had reached an unimaginable level. It felt as if it had reversed time and space. In the blink of an eye, it had already bombarded everyone's heads and entered their hearts. In that instant, everyone felt numb all over their bodies, and all their power had completely dissipated. Everything turned into nothingness. Then, the feeling of being sealed for 30 million years surfaced in everyone's heart. It's over. This thought appeared in everyone's heart at this moment. At this moment, they could only have this thought. In the next instant, they had completely lost all their senses and all their senses toward the outside world. As they fell into that state of being sealed, the cracks on the barrier in front of them began to gradually close up. After a while, it had completely disappeared as if it had never appeared. Indeed, at this moment, Air Maiden, who was above the highest level, revealed a look of realization and smiled. Of course, Luo Fan just smiled and sighed to himself. The dark clouds raged on top of everyone's heads for more than a year, before stopping and gradually dispersing. As the dark clouds dispersed, the many disciples of the true sage recovered one by one. It seems that this method won't work. One of the disciples of the true sage was extremely annoyed. I didn't expect this. The restrictions of this world on us would be so strong. Qing Longzi gritted his teeth, and his expression was filled with an inexplicable fear. They could not leave this world. They would never be able to obtain freedom and would always be restricted by this world. This world would take over all of their attacks and all of their powers. To the disciples of the true sage, this kind of absolute lack of freedom was simply digging out the roots of their cultivation. How could they tolerate this? Since there's no other way, I plan to reincarnate. One of the disciples of the true sage said. As he spoke, he decisively turned around and rushed out of the unseen world, heading towards the normal world. Each of the disciples of the true sage had their own independent will. None of them were the vassals of others. Each of them had their own thoughts, their own beliefs. Under normal circumstances, if it was beneficial for them to gather together, they would naturally not be stingy with them. However, when they felt that it was useless to gather together, they naturally would not gather with others. Reincarnation. Qing Longzi frowned and shook his head. If reincarnation can get rid of this kind of imprint, then this imprint is really too simple. She naturally did not believe that reincarnation would be able to get rid of this kind of imprint. One should know that even if it was an imprint left by an ordinary cultivator, as long as the method was right, it could not be removed just by reincarnation, let alone the world. Although reincarnation is unable to remove this kind of imprint, it can give us a layer of protection. As long as we cultivate our reincarnated bodies to be strong enough, we will naturally be able to cover up part of this kind of imprint. When that time comes, although we will not be able to unleash our full strength, it should not be a problem for us to protect ourselves. Another disciple of the true sage said. As he spoke, he shook his head and bade farewell to the crowd. Similarly, he turned around and left. As they left, more and more disciples of the true sage thought of their own methods. All of them sighed. After bidding farewell to the others, they all left. Not long after, only Qing Longzi and a few others were left here. If this is the way of reincarnation, there is indeed a way. However, it is impossible to completely remove this kind of imprint. I will not adopt such a method. Qing Longzi frowned. Xiao Daozi was also here. When he heard this, he said, "In that case, I will sit and see what you will do. However, I can't think of any way to completely remove this kind of imprint. As long as it is an imprint, there will definitely be traces of its existence. We will definitely be able to find it. Therefore, as long as we are willing to look for it, we will definitely be able to find this imprint." Qing Longzi's eyes were burning. At this moment, it was clear that she had regained her fighting spirit. She no longer looked as tired and depressed as before. Would they really be able to find the brand? The Air Maiden asked Luo Fan from a very high altitude. They should be able to find it. After all, they are disciples of the true sage. It is very normal for them to have some heaven-defying methods. However, finding it is one thing and dealing with it is another. Even if they are disciples of the true sage, their level is still their level. I think they will not have many methods to deal with this kind of imprint. Luo Fan said calmly. In that case, it seems to be quite interesting. It seems quite interesting. The air hostess laughed. It is indeed quite interesting. Previously, they looked down on us from above. Now, it is our turn to look at them. Luo Fan also laughed. At this moment, the two of them were holding hands. They were in a strange space-time. This strange space-time seemed strange and inexplicable. In it, one could see endless special lights and shadows. One could also see endless cultivation paths, cultivation systems, and cultivation principles. These were none other than the things that Luo Fan had used his own understanding of heaven and earth to dive into the depths of heaven and earth. He had submerged all the cultivation paths and cultivation systems that appeared in this heaven and earth. These are the scenes that were reflected by the cultivation principles. In other words, this could be said to be the place of inspiration for all living beings. Or in other words, the source of inspiration. This place contained the inspiration of all living beings and the cultivation achievements of all living beings. However, if they go to reincarnate, we will soon be able to know the cultivation methods of the true sage, right? The air hostess smiled sweetly. She looked so beautiful that no one could look at her directly. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, "The cultivation of the true sage is just that. Even though it's peerlessly exquisite, there shouldn't be much of a difference when compared to other Daos of cultivation. However, it is a cultivation path created by the true sage, after all. There must be some cultivation principles and cultivation secrets of the true sage," the air hostess said indifferently. Hearing this, Luo Fan only smiled and did not speak again. Currently, the air hostess was a burden to the true sage path. She had not really understood it. No matter how many times he said it, when the mysteries of the true sage were placed in front of her, she would instinctively want to understand it. Under such circumstances, he naturally could not be bothered to say more. Anyway, when the time was right and the opportunity was right, she would understand it eventually. I almost forgot again. The air hostess sighed, and there was an inexplicable helplessness in her expression. Don't suppress yourself. If you want to understand it, go ahead. This might be a necessary process. A mountain is not a mountain, and a mountain is still a mountain. In the end, you can't skip any of these three realms, Luo Fan said calmly. Hearing this, an inexplicable expression appeared on the air hostess' face. She said, "Perhaps, at this moment, the countless light shadows, space-time, and images around them began to surge rapidly. Brand new light shadows and brand new worlds appeared from the countless light shadows, from small to large. These brand new lights and shadows possessed extraordinary power. They impacted the surrounding world and the lights and shadows, causing the originally stable world to once again produce an inexplicable riot. It was like a drop of water dripping from a calm pot of boiling oil. What is this?" When the air hostess saw this change, there was an inexplicable surprise on her face. This should be the cultivation path of the reincarnated true sage. Luo Fan said calmly, "You're quite fast." The air hostess could not help but praise. She quickly came before the light shadows and began to look at them with a burning gaze. She used all kinds of techniques to test the light shadows and comprehend the various mysteries within them. Looking at the air hostess expression, Luo Fan could not help but shake his head. It seems like it's really instinct. Just now, she said that she had to restrain herself. However, these things that appeared without going through her brain were already there. However, it was just as he had said before. This might be a necessary process. Perhaps she had not comprehended enough mysteries of the true sage. She would not be able to truly touch the soul and comprehend the existence of the burden. Therefore, he did not stop her. He just sat cross-legged in the light shadows and began to carefully sense his body, his soul, and the thing that was walking towards him. He did not know how long it would take for it to descend. It was his second tribulation. While Luo Fan and the air hostess were immersed in their own cultivation process, Qing Longzi and the others had already determined their next move. There were 7 people left. Qing Longzi, Qiu Daozi, and the other 5 disciples of the true sage. These 7 people were unwilling to reincarnate. After Qing Longzi gave his suggestion, they could not come up with a better suggestion. However, they decided to act according to Qing Longzi's suggestion. And this, obviously, the best way was to act together. Of course, they would not split up. Instead, they began to leave this unseen place together. They headed towards the normal space-time. Finally, they came to a place with verdant hills and limpid water. This place was not considered a spirited mountain-surpassing region in this world. The concentration of the essence Qi and the Qi of heaven and earth were only considered ordinary. If it was a normal cultivator, they would definitely not choose this place as their cave abode. In fact, it was also because of this that this place was still empty. No cultivator came here to set up a cave abode. However, this was not considered a good cultivation environment. To the disciples of the true sage, it was nothing at all. To them, power could be created by oneself. As for the Qi of heaven and earth, to them, it was not the more the merrier. Instead, it was the less the merrier. The more they had, the more they would be restricted by the world, and the more they would be unable to escape. On the contrary, the less the Qi of heaven and earth, the more they would be able to get a chance to breathe. Under such circumstances, this place was the most suitable place for them to choose. Now, all the damage they caused to the world would be restricted by the world. The destructive power would be eliminated by the world. Under such circumstances, they could not open up any space-time or heaven and earth. To open up, it was naturally to destroy something before creating something. However, they were in a state where they could not cause any damage to the world. How could they open up a world? The only thing they could do was to set up a formation and some Dharma treasures to build their cave abode. Of course, this was not difficult for them. Compared to opening up space-time and heaven and earth, the cave abode built in this way was indeed of a much lower level. However, as long as the arrangements were good enough and the design was tight enough, the cave abode built would definitely be extremely mysterious and would definitely have unimaginable defensive power. In just a short 2 hours, a very ordinary and simple-looking mountain appeared in this beautiful place. It blended with the other mountains here, so much so that one could not even tell that this mountain had not been here before. Inside this mountain that originally did not exist, there was an inexplicable space-time here at this moment. This space-time looked extremely mysterious, and there were beautiful sceneries everywhere. However, inside, it was filled with killing intent. Everything inside was completely a formation. All were runes, and all were power. When all of these were combined together, they formed a defensive measure. Even if a supreme emperor came here, they would die a violent death. At this moment, Qing Longzi and the other 6 were in a building at the center of this mountain. There were dozens of these buildings, and many living beings appeared out of nowhere. The weakest of these living beings was at the innate grand heavenly realm, and the strongest had even reached the false sage realm. After these living beings appeared, they started to get busy. They continuously handled all kinds of high-class and low-class chores in this world. Obviously, these were the slaves that they had created. If we want to find that imprint, we need to perform the one-step cleansing technique that Master taught us. I wonder if anyone has mastered this divine power? Qing Longzi said to Qiu Daozi and the others. At this moment, they were in a big hall, and each of them occupied a direction, facing each other from afar. This big hall was densely engraved with countless runes and lines. As they moved, they emitted an inexplicably powerful aura. It felt as though it could erupt with a terrifying power that could destroy everything in the next instant. In the center of this big hall, the lines constructed a huge and complicated diagram in an extremely strange way, connecting everyone together. Although it's not a body cleansing technique, I also have a similar technique, Chiodaozi said calmly. This divine power that could cleanse one's body and mind was almost a compulsory cultivation technique for disciples of true sages like them. Normally speaking, they had to circulate it almost every day to completely remove all the tangible and intangible things that did not belong to them that had been born over the years, so as to maintain the purity of their body and mind, and not be contaminated by any external things. Under such circumstances, how could they not know this divine power? Chapter 1795. As they cast spells similar to the body cleansing technique, indescribable waves began to radiate from their bodies. They began to slowly gather towards the center, gradually condensing into a mysterious, invisible existence. It slowly intertwined with the countless lines and runes below, creating an indescribable resonance. Under this resonance, the entire hall began to tremble subtly. Amidst the tremors, the space and time in the palace seemed to be moved by a supreme hand, and all sorts of subtle changes occurred. All laws, time, space, power, matter, and everything else started to be reconstructed. At this moment, dark clouds gathered above the cave abode, and faint rumbles of thunder could be heard. It seemed to be brewing, ready to strike at any time. However, the rumbling didn't last for too long, and it didn't come crashing down. Not long after, it slowly dissipated, and the surroundings returned to their original peaceful state. The azure dragon's son suddenly raised his head to look at the sky and said, "As expected, just doing this won't cause the world to attack me." The various changes in the sky were clearly all perceived by her. Just now, she had seen the dark clouds gathering in the sky quite clearly and understood it quite well. Looks like this world is not without flaws. Taoist Xiao said with a faint smile on his face. Maybe it is, or maybe it is just that this heaven and earth has seen through everything and believes that we will not be able to achieve our goal, so it is too lazy to waste its energy to attack us. Another disciple of the true divine sect said. Hearing this, everyone's expression changed slightly. Logically speaking, both of these possibilities naturally existed. However, there was no point in saying it now. At that moment, everyone fell silent. However, they worked even harder to unleash their own cleansing arts and began to work together with other people's arts. They absorbed the wondrous effects of other types of arts and compressed, condensed, and sublimated them in preparation to use them to comprehend themselves. He searched through all the imprints in his body. All of them were not disciples of the same true sage. The divine abilities they mastered were naturally different, and each divine ability had its own emphasis. He had his own advantages. In that case, combining the various divine abilities would be equivalent to combining the advantages of the various divine abilities. The power and effect of the divine ability would naturally be greatly enhanced. And at this time, they're even more determined to search for the imprint left on them by the heavens and earth. This was obviously the best way. The indescribable fluctuation that was brewing in the center continued to grow and condense. It continued to sublimate. Gradually, an indescribable light began to radiate from the center of the ripples. Under this light, everything in the universe seemed to have been purified. Everything that did not belong to the birth of the normal world began to gradually disappear. Even the surrounding palace began to distort and tremble slightly at this moment. It was as if it was about to collapse and be completely eliminated. This palace was also man-made, but it was not born from this world. It was just born. Such an existence naturally couldn't be preserved under the purifying light. Of course, this light had only leaked out a little, and the main body hadn't been blasted onto the palace. Hence, This change towards destruction didn't come to an end, and the palace didn't really disappear completely. At this moment, the seven of them all had looks of joy on their faces. The appearance of this light meant that their original plan had a high chance of success. Based on their understanding of the body-cleansing ability, they would need at least tens of millions of years of cultivation to be able to condense such a light. But now, in such a short time, this kind of light had already appeared. Could it be that they still couldn't see how correct their choice was? With this correct result, they naturally began to exert their strength. More and more power and mysteries were continuously channeled into the ripples in the center of the palace. As this power was channeled, the ripples in the center became more and more intense and intense. Eventually, the light also became more and more intense and obvious. Under the illumination of this light, Qing Longzi and the others all felt a strange existence in their bodies being continuously eliminated. This existence wasn't something amazing, nor was it something that would cause serious consequences. Instead, it was something that they had absorbed during the process of cultivation. It was some information and mysteries that hadn't completely fused with them yet. Under normal circumstances, such an existence would completely fuse with them after a period of cultivation. In the end, it would transform into the foundation of their cultivation and become resources for their future growth. However, at this moment, under this purifying light, the information and mysteries that hadn't completely fused were clearly impurities that needed to be eliminated. During the process of the information and mysteries being eliminated, Qing Longzi and the others all felt as if they were losing something. Something that had originally been extremely clear and clear gradually became blurry. To them, this feeling was like someone was gouging out their flesh. It was truly too painful. However, in order to find the mark of the fusion of heaven and earth in their bodies, they could only endure this pain and allow this purifying light to envelop their bodies. In fact, they even had to work hard to channel power and willpower into the light so that it would become brighter and more powerful. It went without saying how uncomfortable this feeling was. The light became brighter and more obvious. Gradually, under the light, the surrounding hall became illusory. Finally, at a certain moment, when the light was as intense as the sun, the surrounding hall finally disappeared completely. Only countless runes and lines remained in the void, condensing to form an illusory hall that was completely formed by runes and lines. This was also because the light didn't gather all of its power on the palace. If this light really targeted this hall, then not only would these runes and lines not be preserved, even the surrounding buildings and this huge formation would definitely not be preserved. They would be completely purified by this light. At this moment, the indescribable existence that appeared on Qing Longzi and the others increased in number and intensity. As this existence was separated from them, all of them looked indescribably frustrated. This lasted for a few days. After a few days, when the light was so intense that even Qing Longzi and the others found it extremely piercing, the indescribable existence that was expelled from their bodies gradually disappeared. In the end, all the existence completely disappeared. This meant that their bodies, on a certain level, it had become truly pure. Of course, it also meant that the results of their cultivation during this period had been completely eliminated. If there's nothing to gain, we'll suffer a great loss this time. Qiu Daozi suddenly let out a sigh. Although the effect of this light was already extremely obvious, he knew that this was just the beginning. What they had to do next was the key. Moreover, the losses they would suffer would be even greater, even greater. What's the point of thinking about this? What we should think about now is how to find the brand and how to get rid of it before the losses are too great. Qing Longzi shouted. There were 7 people present, 6 men and 1 woman. However, the most decisive and bold one was the woman, Qing Longzi. In fact, it was also because of this that the one who had been making the decisions, all this, while was Qing Longzi. Hearing her words, everyone had a determined look on their faces. Things had already come to this point. No matter how much they regretted or complained, things would not change. Since that was the case, what was the point of wasting time on lamenting? At that moment, everyone shouted softly. The large mass of waves that had completely turned into an intense purifying light was divided into 7 parts. Under everyone's guidance, they separated and entered their bodies. As the light entered their bodies, the place that had originally seemed to be filled with the sun and had turned into a world of light instantly became dim. The runes and lines that had been on the verge of collapsing under the light started to squirm. Waves of powerful energy were born out of thin air as they wriggled. They gradually filled the space between the runes and the lines, covering the runes and the lines, gradually forming the original hall. In the blink of an eye, the originally spacious place was once again covered by the huge hall. However, no one was in the mood to pay attention to that at this moment. At this moment, all their thoughts were on their bodies. They were focused on the light that had enveloped every part of their bodies. After the light entered their bodies, it was like a drop of water falling into boiling oil. It started to produce extremely intense changes. Under such intense changes, their bodies felt like they were being sliced into pieces. It made them feel as if they were once again being punished by the heavens and earth. That kind of discomfort made it impossible for them to maintain their calm expressions. Their faces were all distorted, and even their bodies seemed to be wriggling under this kind of pain, as if they could collapse at any time. Compared to this pain, the changes that were happening to their bodies made them even more worried. This was because at this very moment, the bits of power that had been born in their bodies over the years, and even the slight changes that they had cultivated in this world, were now completely different from before. Everything was gradually erased under this light. Their bodies kept returning to the state they were in when they first entered this world, gradually returning to the state they were in when they were still on Earth. In other words, all of their cultivation, all of their explorations, and all of their changes after entering this world would gradually disappear under this light. Even faintly, even bits and pieces of their memories gradually became blurry during this process, as if they were about to leave their memories. This made them have no choice but to constantly repeat their memories and strengthen the traces of their own memories in their hearts at all times in order to resist the elimination of this purification light. When one cultivated to a certain level, memory was power. As long as their memories were still there, no matter how much power they lost, no matter how much damage they suffered physically and mentally, they would definitely be able to recover in the shortest time possible. The rank 9 pseudo-saint was obviously already at a certain level. It was precisely because of this. That was why they were so concerned about their memories just now. That was why they would wholeheartedly protect their memories at this time when their physical strength was so severely damaged. Although this kind of behavior was made in order to resist the elimination of the purification light, it was a choice that they had no choice but to make. However, this kind of behavior unknowingly coincided with the principle of completely fusing these memories with themselves. In the end, it made the effect of this purification light on these memories become smaller and smaller. After an unknown period of time, when they came back to their senses at a certain moment, they discovered that those memories were being attacked and erased by the light. There was actually no longer any damage to them. It was as if these memories had truly become an inseparable part of them. They no longer became impurities that made their bodies turbid. Understanding this, the 7 of them could not help but feel a little puzzled. There was both joy and helplessness in their hearts. They were happy because this time it was a blessing in disguise. They had finally truly fused these memories with themselves, making themselves more pure. However, they were helpless because this kind of fusion could actually be completely achieved after a little more time. There was no need to waste so much energy and endure so much pain. However, it was still a good thing, so they were naturally more happy. When everyone came back to their senses one by one, they saw the same divine light in each other's eyes. At this moment, they naturally knew that what had happened to each other should be about the same. Sighing, they sank their minds back into their bodies and began to truly search for the imprint that must exist in their bodies, the imprint that this world had placed in their bodies. That kind of imprint was so mysterious that it had even reached the level of a saint's imprint. If it was deliberately hidden, how could it be so easy to find it? Although everyone was wholeheartedly searching at this time, even giving up their own bodies, their own strength, and their own cultivation, they still did not find anything after thousands of years. Or rather, they did not find what they wanted. Thousands of years of purification only made their bodies extremely pure. All the power that did not conform to them, and all the mysteries that did not conform to them were unknowingly eliminated by them. It could be said that from the perspective of cultivation, their thousands of years of hard work had already laid an extremely deep foundation for cultivation, allowing the purity of their bodies to reach a level that was previously unimaginable. However, it was obvious that this was only from the perspective of cultivation. As for the goal of their secluded cultivation this time, which was to find the imprint of heaven and earth, the thousands of years of hard work could be said to be fruitless. On this day, one of the disciples of a true sage finally said impatiently, "No, if this goes on, we won't be able to find the imprint at all." His words caused everyone to open their eyes one by one. At this moment, all of them could already feel that although the purifying light was still shining on their bodies, it had completely stopped changing them. It felt as though the light had turned into ordinary light. This situation meant that their bodies had become extremely pure, and it also meant that the effective period of the light had completely passed. At this stage, we can basically confirm that there is a possibility, Qing Longzi said slowly at this moment. As she spoke, the light in her body started to disappear gradually. Her body was leaving the strange state that it had been in for thousands of years. Seeing her actions, the expressions of Qiu Daozi and the rest changed slightly, and they seemed to be deep in thought. "What possibility do you mean by that?" Qiu Daozi frowned and asked. "Based on our thousands of years of hard work, even if it is the imprint of a sage, we will definitely be able to find it. We might even be able to drive it away directly. Now, though we have not found the imprint of heaven and earth, there is only one possibility, and that is that the imprint is not in our bodies," Qing Longzi said. His words caused everyone's expression to change drastically. Indeed, after thinking about it, this is the only possibility. They mumbled, and they had a look of realization on their faces. As their expressions changed, the purifying light in their bodies started to extinguish gradually. Not long after, the strange state on the bodies of the other 6 people also gradually disappeared. "If it is not in our bodies, then where is it?" Qiu Daozi asked. "It can affect us, but it is not in our bodies." "Of course, it is in our luck path," Qing Longzi said calmly. "If it is luck path, it will not be easy to investigate thoroughly." A true sage disciple frowned and said, "Of course it is not easy. However, do you want to give up?" Qing Longzi's expression was still calm. However, everyone could hear the sarcasm in his words. Hearing this, the true sage disciple laughed coldly and said, "Is it fun to be angry like this? Remember, I did not cause you to be in this state. It is your own choice. Here, no one owes you anything." Chapter 1796. Shock flashed across Qing Longzi's eyes. Soon, she took a deep breath and let out a long sigh. "I'm sorry. It's my fault. I shouldn't have brought my emotions into this." When the disciple of the true sage heard this, his expression softened a little. However, he still did not speak. Qiu Daozi said, "It's not difficult to investigate the luck path. However, if you want to manipulate the luck path, I'm afraid the difficulty is not that simple." Hearing this, the others all showed a troubled expression on their faces. Obviously, they agreed with Qiu Daozi's words. As the disciples of the true sage, it was not too difficult for these rank 9 pseudo-sages to sense their own luck path and understand the existence of the luck path world in the river of luck path. It was relatively easy for them to use some of the techniques passed down by the true sage to achieve this step. However, the troublesome thing was to manipulate the luck path world. Luck path was not limited to any heaven and earth. Even true sages could not truly escape the control of the river of luck path. It went without saying how difficult it was to change such an existence and carry out specific manipulations. Moreover, what they had to do was not as simple as manipulating the luck path. They had to find the imprint that was placed in the heaven and earth. If it was possible, they had to destroy the imprint completely. The difficulty of this operation was almost at the peak. Let's not talk about other things first. The most important thing now is to find the imprint. After that, we'll do what we have to do, Qing Longzi said. Everyone nodded their heads at this. As everyone nodded their heads, they started to take action. Their respective Dharma treasures started to appear above their heads. After these Dharma treasures appeared, they naturally started to vibrate and gradually released a strange light. This light was different from the spiritual light that could display limitless power previously. Instead, it was like a strange lens that seemed to filter some kind of light. After it appeared, the scene that everyone saw through the light started to change gradually. The light kept changing and getting stronger. Eventually, it turned into a large light screen that gradually intertwined. It turned into a large area above their heads and looked like a sea of light. The light that was emitted by the Dharma treasures of the true sage disciples was different from the others. Not only was the color different, but there was also a significant difference in their nature. And this difference, it was just like the body cleansing technique they had used before. Although the difference was huge, they were interwoven together. However, they could complement each other, and in the end, they could combine into an existence that was many times more powerful than a single one. And they could display power that was many times more powerful than a single one. After these rays of light gathered, they began to vibrate and gradually transform. As it changed, the scene that appeared behind the light also began to change. At first, it could be seen from the light. It was just a bizarre distortion and transformation of the various laws and laws. But as time passed, these fundamental changes gradually disappeared. A deeper image, one that was closer to what they were looking for, gradually appeared. Finally, at a certain moment, as they watched in pleasant surprise, an incomparably huge river with no end or end appeared on the light screen. This was the River of Luck. After the Luck Dao River appeared, the light coming from everyone's magic treasures gradually retracted. Not long after, the light was completely absorbed into their magic treasures and disappeared without a trace. And at this moment, the Luck Dao River still existed in everyone's eyes. It had not disappeared. This situation looked very strange, but it was actually very normal. After all, they were already rank 9 pseudo-sages, and their strength had already reached an unbelievable level. In fact, they already possessed the ability to see the location of the Luck Dao River. The reason why they could not see it before was because they had not found the level of the Luck Dao River. And just now, they had obviously used their magic treasures to help them find the level of the Luck Dao River. Now that they had found it, they naturally did not need to use any magic treasures to help them see it. With just their eyes, they could already see the existence of the Luck Dao River. At this moment, Qing Longzi frowned deeply and said, "Our Luck Dao has indeed changed. It was impossible for ordinary people to find their own Luck Dao world in the endless Luck Dao world. But to a true sage disciple like Qing Longzi, it was not a problem at all. Although he had only seen the Luck Dao River for a short while, Qing Longzi had clearly seen his own Luck Dao world. Moreover, not only could he see his own Luck Dao world, but he could also see the Luck Dao world of Qiu Daozi and the others. It was actually not difficult. With the current relationship between the 7 of them, their fates could be said to be completely linked. Naturally, the Luck Dao world had already established an extremely close connection. If he could find one of them, it would obviously not be too difficult to find the others. At this moment, Qiu Daozi's expression became rather ugly. Indeed, there has already been a change. There seems to be something more up there. At this moment, the Luck Dao world of the 7 of them was faintly glowing in the endless Luck Dao world. They occupied 7 directions of the Luck Dao River, and the connection between them was unprecedentedly close. It almost formed an iron chain that firmly fixed them on the Luck Dao River, and they could not move at all. It's a pity that Master said that although luck Tao is important, it is still not something that we can consider. If we consider too much, it will instead affect our cultivation. Hence, he did not teach us the method to thoroughly investigate and change luck Tao. A true sage disciple sighed and said. His words caused everyone's expression to turn gloomy. Evidently, their encounters were similar as well. Our masters are true sages, so what they said is naturally correct. However, we have already fallen into a situation where we can't get out of, so we can't care about this taboo anymore. Qing Longzi said directly. That's right. Even mortals know this, so how can we continue to be pedantic? Qiu Daozi said directly. Hearing this, everyone's expression gradually recovered. With our intelligence and our foundation, this should not be a difficult thing to do. Everyone nodded their heads. They actually found the luck Tao world. They are indeed the disciples of true sages. Previously, I thought they would give up after not being able to find it in their own bodies. In the space-time where countless cultivators and living beings' cultivation Taos gathered, the empty maiden said to Luo Fan in surprise. At this moment, the two of them were traveling in an extremely mysterious cultivation system. They were feeling the charm of this brand new cultivation system and using this charm to stimulate their own worldview. Under the stimulation, their worldview would naturally evolve in a more complete direction. Hearing what the empty maiden said, Luo Fan swept his gaze across a monster that was attacking them and said, "This is very normal. After all, they're the disciples of true sages. It is normal for them to do anything." At this moment, the monster that was attacking him previously roared again and pounced towards him. This monster was the demonic obstruction in this cultivation system. It could be said to be the divergence of the cultivation system. It could also be said to be the bottleneck of the cultivation system. The more perfect the cultivation system, the fewer such demonic obstruction. Every demonic obstruction would also become weaker. Among the various cultivation systems that Luo Fan and the Empty Maiden were in, there were millions of such demonic obstruction. It was not the most among the many cultivation systems, but it was not the least either. The demonic obstruction in front of them was at most equivalent to the innate grand Luo realm. To Luo Fan and the Empty Maiden, it was not even comparable to an ant. To Luo Fan and the Empty Maiden, it was not even comparable to an ant. However, this demonic obstruction had a special characteristic. It was immortal. This kind of immortal obstruction was not the kind that Luo Fan was pursuing. Instead, it was the kind of immortal obstruction that was completely connected to the cultivation system. In other words, as long as the cultivation system existed, no matter what kind of attack the demonic obstruction encountered, no matter how thoroughly it was destroyed, it would completely recover in the next instant. It would not suffer any damage at all. It was as if the attack did not exist at all. Such a characteristic made the difficulty of dealing with the demonic obstruction skyrocketed by 1,000 times. Although Luo Fan and the Empty Maiden could easily crush it with just their gazes, it would completely recover in the next instant. It was clearly meaningless to crush it. Therefore, they could only keep brushing it away instead of wasting time and energy to erase it. In that case, do they stand a chance of succeeding? The Empty Maiden asked curiously. How could they possibly succeed? In the river of luck Tao, all other divine abilities are useless. Only halos are effective, Luo Fan said calmly. Halos? Like the main character halos or something like that. That's right, Luo Fan said with a smile. He had also studied the luck Tao world for a long time. He even thought of ways to operate his own luck Tao world with the advantage of having a unique worldview. In other words, apart from true saints, he was probably the only one who understood the luck Tao world the most. Such a person, naturally, he had the most right to comment on the actions of Qing Longzi and the rest. Since they could become disciples of true saints, they should have the main character halos, right? If that's the case, will the main character halos turn their misfortune into fortune, turning the hardship into a fortuitous encounter that allows them to soar to the sky? The Empty Maiden asked curiously. As disciples of true saints, they naturally have the main character halos. However, that's only a low-level main character halos at most. In the Earth universe, they might be able to turn misfortune into fortune, and any hardship that they encounter would turn into a fortuitous encounter. However, it won't be the case in this world, Luo Fan said with a smile. As he spoke, he did not hide anything. He told the empty maiden about his understanding of the halos in detail. Sage halos, accessory halos, low-level main character halos, middle-level main character halos. I didn't expect the world of halos to be so extensive and profound. The empty maiden mumbled with eagerness in her eyes. Looking at her expression, Luo Fan said with a smile, "Don't be too concerned about the halos. There was a period of time when I used the halos as an important indicator of fortuitous encounters. I even spent a lot of effort to synthesize the main character halos. However, I realized later on that although the halos have various effects and can bring about various special encounters, if one were to advance according to these encounters, it would only make one's position in the Luck Dao world become more and more stable. It would become more and more difficult to transcend." Hearing that, the empty maiden was slightly shocked and said, "What do you mean? Difficult to transcend? Don't tell me that if I advance according to the encounters triggered by the halos, I won't be able to break through in the future." Luo Fan smiled and said, "Of course it won't be impossible to break through. It's just that I won't be able to become a true divine." Hearing that, the empty maiden instantly gave up on the idea of manipulating the halos. For her current self, becoming a true divine was her only goal in cultivation. If she couldn't become a true divine, what was the point of breaking through? "Well, you just mentioned that there's a sage halo. What's going on?" The empty maiden thought for a while and asked curiously. "The sage halo is the true divine among the halos. It's the most supreme existence among the halos that I know of. Of course, I don't know how it's formed, but according to my conjecture, it shouldn't be an innate existence. Instead, it should be formed when a cultivator became a true divine. It could be said to be the accompanying halo of a true divine," Luo Fan said with a smile. Although he said it was just a conjecture, he was actually quite confident in his conjecture. After all, this was the most reasonable possibility that he had deduced based on his understanding of halos. "I see," the empty maiden said in realization. "Okay, let's not talk about this. You seem to have sensed something just now. Did you sense something?" Luo Fan changed the topic and asked. Hearing that, the empty maiden came back to her senses. She frowned and said, "It seems that some kind of opportunity is summoning me and asking me to go somewhere." Hearing that, Luo Fan's eyes narrowed, and he said, "This must be a sudden impulse of yours. We can't ignore it." Immediately, he pulled the empty maiden, and with a shake of his body, he brought her out of this space-time and appeared above the 9th layer of rules. It was empty here. Apart from that strange space-time, there was nothing else. After arriving here, the empty maiden's eyes became slightly dazed. She said, "My senses seem to be clearer here." As she spoke, her body involuntarily moved in a certain direction. Seeing her dazed look, Luo Fan did not stop her. He immediately followed behind her and moved forward together with her. The opportunity to summon the empty maiden was clearly not in any ordinary place. Instead, it was in an extremely wonderful and mysterious place. If he wanted to get there, he couldn't just advance in a straight line. Instead, one had to go around an extremely complicated path. One had to constantly shift and shuttle between the various layers of rules, in normal space-time, in the unseen world, and even in the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. Just like that, Luo Fan followed the empty maiden and moved forward for 1,000 years. In 1,000 years, they had traveled a distance of billions of light years, moved through countless layers of space-time, and passed through countless rules and laws. Finally, at a certain moment, the empty maiden brought Luo Fan to an extremely wonderful place. This place did not belong to normal space-time, did not belong to any layer of rules and laws, did not belong to the unseen world. and did not belong to the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. Before coming here, Luo Fan did not even know that such a place existed in this world. Where is this? A trace of shock flashed through Luo Fan's heart as he looked at the strange, misty space-time in front of him. He was the one who had created the world. Although his imprint had been destroyed by the world during the 8th Great Tribulation, he believed that his understanding of the world was absolutely incomparable to that of any other existence. However, even he did not know that such a space-time existed in this world. Even he didn't know that there was such a mysterious place here. To him, this had completely overturned his worldview. How could he not be concerned? At this moment, the empty maiden had already returned to her senses. With a complicated expression, she said, "The opportunity to summon me is here." Upon hearing this, Luo Fan smiled bitterly and said, "I didn't expect such a place to exist in this world. It seems that although I was the one who created this world, my understanding of it is already far behind." Seeing that Luo Fan was disappointed, the empty maiden held his hand and said, "Isn't this better? There are more secrets in this world and more places to explore. Isn't this what you want?" "Indeed, you're right. This is indeed what I want." Luo Fan smiled. At this moment, he had already become excited again. In fact, this situation could not be better for him. A brand new place, a brand new secret, and a brand new mystery. Every single one of them could allow him to have a deeper understanding of the world. The appearance of every single one of them was enough to stimulate his worldview, and it was enough to allow his worldview to be further developed and perfected. The reason why he seemed a little disappointed before was because this change was too sudden and he could not accept it for a while. Now that he had come back to his senses, the feeling was completely different. Seeing that Luo Fan's mental state had recovered, the empty maiden heaved a sigh of relief. Seeing her like this, Luo Fan only smiled and said, "What's there to worry about? Are you afraid that I can't accept it?" "Of course not." The empty maiden hurriedly shook her head in denial. At this moment, a strange ripple was vaguely emitted from the hazy area in front of them. Chapter 1797. In a trance, countless distorted figures appeared in the blur. These figures appeared in groups of 2 and appeared everywhere in the blur. All of them looked extremely distorted, as if they were about to take shape, but were unable to take shape. As the fluctuations continued to strengthen and expand, the countless figures became more and more real. The distortions also became smaller and smaller. "What is this?" the air maiden exclaimed. Luo Fan's expression was extremely solemn. He had already recognized what these figures were. "They are us." After a long while, he finally said faintly, "How is this possible?" the air maiden exclaimed. But very quickly, her expression became incomparably solemn. The space maiden was also an extremely powerful supreme emperor. Her eyesight and observation skills were very strong, so there was no need to say much. She hadn't dared to believe it previously because it had happened in a hurry. However, after taking a closer look, she confirmed what Luo Fan had said. If she carefully analyzed the countless distorted figures in front of her, she would find that they were indeed her and Luo Fan. How could this be? She mumbled. Luo Fan's expression was solemn, and his heart was filled with doubts. The figures that appeared in the blur weren't illusions, or illusions. Although they were extremely distorted, every single one of them exuded a very real feeling. Clearly, even though he didn't know what kind of existences these figures were, their true nature wasn't discounted at all. He could understand why there would be 1 or 2 groups of such figures. After all, the world might have created a clone based on them. However, there were more than 100 million figures in front of him at a glance. However, this possibility had been completely eliminated, so he couldn't figure out what it was for the time being. Since he couldn't figure out what it was, he naturally wouldn't rashly barge in. Hence, at this moment, he and Space Maiden stood quietly outside the blurry space-time, quietly watching the various changes in the space-time. The fluctuations in the blur kept getting stronger. As the number of figures continued to increase, the distortion also became smaller and smaller, and the illusory feeling also became lesser and lesser. It was as if these figures were constantly walking out of the illusory world into the real world as the fluctuations grew stronger. After an unknown period of time, the fluctuation gradually subsided. At this moment, those figures had already turned into their true forms as they quietly stood in the mist. None of them looked at Luo Fan and the air hostess. Every group of figures seemed to be doing something at this moment. They seemed to be cultivating, but they also seemed to be deducing something. Looking at this change, Luo Fan couldn't help but frown again. Is that it? The thought flashed through his mind. The situation in front of him was clearly beyond his expectations. In his original thoughts, no matter how the space-time was able to do it, there were so many images of the two of them. It was inevitable that they would do something to them. As for him, he also wanted to know the nature of those figures through their actions. However, this was what happened in front of him. Those figures were actually just standing there quietly, without any intention of taking any action. How could he accept this in such a short time? All of a sudden, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. Although they are us, there is a huge difference in the aura of each of them. When he thought of this, he faintly had some ideas. He hurriedly focused his eyes and carefully sensed the countless figures in the misty space at this moment. As he sensed them, he couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression, because among these endless figures, every one of them was different from the others. In terms of aura and nature, they were all the same. Moreover, every one of them was different. Compared to him and the Air Maiden, there was a difference of varying sizes. I can feel that if I enter it, I will be able to obtain a huge harvest. My opportunity is inside. At this moment, the air hostess murmured. At this moment, Luo Fan's heart was also inexplicably moved. He knew that as long as he entered it, he would be able to obtain a huge harvest, of course. Although he had such a feeling, he obviously couldn't just casually walk in with the air hostess. Although it was unlikely that he could completely deduce the origin of this misty space, he at least had to know what dangers there were, what opportunities there were, what he had to guard against, and what he had to pay attention to. Otherwise, he might not only encounter great danger, he might also miss out on the greatest benefits and the strongest opportunity because of some oversight. If that was the case, it would be a waste. His heart slightly moved. He stopped the air hostess who was about to step forward and said, "Don't rush. Let's study it first. Since the opportunity is already here, it won't be a problem even if we go a little later. But if something goes wrong, the situation will be terrible." Hearing this, the air hostess's body trembled. She came back to her senses and said, "I understand." As she spoke, she forcefully suppressed the desire in her heart and looked at the misty space in front of her with burning eyes. There were all kinds of information, mysteries, and inspirations in her heart that kept flashing. However, she did not sit by the side and wait for Luo Fan to study it. Instead, she began to study it herself, as an existence who had also sorted out her own unique worldview. Although the air hostess had always allowed Luo Fan to make decisions and allowed Luo Fan to help her cultivate, it did not mean that she was just a vase. It did not mean that she did not have her own ability and did not know how to study it herself. Seeing this, Luo Fan was relieved. His eyes narrowed, and he began to absorb all the information, principles, and mysteries in this misty space into his heart. He began to deduce, comprehend, and find the use of this misty space. At first, the information and mysteries that poured into his heart were extremely obscure and chaotic. Even he wanted to understand this information and comprehend the true profoundness within through these mysteries. Even if it was him, it would be almost impossible to understand this information and comprehend the true profoundness within through these mysteries. That was also almost impossible. However, Luo Fan was Luo Fan after all. As a cultivator who had sensed the existence of the Second Great Tribulation, his research ability and comprehension ability had reached an unimaginable level. Gradually, he was able to distinguish some things from the various chaotic information and mysteries. This is a different space-time dimension. Finally, after a few days, his eyes flickered, and he finally grasped a key point. When he grasped this key point, he suddenly felt that the chaotic information and space-time actually became clearer at this moment, and the order gradually emerged. More and more information and mysteries were comprehended by him in the process. In the end, when he finally distinguished nearly 1% of the information and mysteries that he could understand, he finally understood the real use of this misty space. They are us who walk different paths. Luo Fan said. We are us who walk different paths. The air hostess's eyes flickered. Countless thoughts instantly gathered in his mind, and he finally saw some clues about this misty space, of course. Compared to Luo Fan's comprehension, it was just a small clue. That was a difference of dozens of times. However, this was enough for her to confirm that what Luo Fan said was the truth. That's right. Here, it was the intersection of different space-time dimensions. They are us in different space-time dimensions. At this moment, they are looking at us as we are looking at them. They are also countless in this misty space. One of the silhouettes, Luo Fan, said with an ugly expression. Hearing this, the air hostess's expression turned into one of shock. If that's the case, doesn't it mean that apart from the world we're familiar with, there are countless worlds of different space-time dimensions? And in these worlds, there are also true saints, disciples of true saints, us, countless other cultivators, and countless living beings. She murmured, her expression changing. Anyone who thought that they were unique would not feel good when they heard that they were just one of countless similar individuals, and that all their previous perceptions were wrong because they were frogs at the bottom of a well. At this moment, Luo Fan's expression was quite ugly. In his eyes, there were countless information, pictures, lines, and lights flickering. Just from these two eyes, one could tell that he was thinking intensely. Finally, after a while, he looked a little relaxed and said, "No." His words made the air hostess' eyes flicker. There was an indescribable hope in her eyes as she looked at Luo Fan expectantly. Obviously, she wanted to hear a conclusion from Luo Fan that would completely overturn her previous thoughts. Luo Fan said, "The relationship between different space-time dimensions is not the parallel structure that you imagined. It's a more complicated and mysterious structure. These different space-time dimensions can be said to exist, but they can also be said to not exist. I still can't understand the real reason and the real mystery. However, I'm sure that the situation where there are countless of us and countless worlds in your imagination will not happen. It can be said to exist, but it can also be said to not exist." The air hostess seemed to be deep in thought. Even though she was listening to Luo Fan's description of the structure between different space-time dimensions, she felt as if her head was going to explode. It was almost impossible for her to really understand it. That's right. Luo Fan sighed, and the countless lights and shadows deep in his eyes gradually disappeared. The relationship between different space-time dimensions was too profound for him. They were like the mystery of the true divine level, not to mention the fact that he could not understand them clearly. Even if he could comprehend it through various methods, it would only be a burden to him. It would only make him feel pressured, but it wouldn't bring him much benefit. Therefore, he just sighed and said to the air hostess, "I have a rough idea of where your opportunity lies." "Oh, what's that?" The air hostess was curious. At that moment, she was much more relaxed than before. Although she did not understand it, she knew that she was still unique. She was not a frog at the bottom of a well. Naturally, she was much more relaxed. Enter the intersection of the space-time dimensions and find the space-time dimension that belongs to you, Luo Fan said calmly. Find the space-time dimension that belongs to me. Then, what will happen if I find it? What will happen if I can't? The air hostess asked. Find it. You will have a unique space-time dimension that belongs to you. Just like this. Luo Fan said. As he spoke, his body moved and the space-time dimension around his body changed naturally. The change in space-time dimension made his body look illusory in the eyes of the air hostess. It was as if he was separated by thousands of mountains and rivers and countless space-time dimensions. An indescribable feeling began to spread. It was as if an extremely complete thing had appeared in front of her. It was incomparably perfect. No matter what method or power was used, it would not be able to affect it. It was like heaven and earth that could not be destroyed. Is this the unique space-time dimension? The air hostess' eyes were filled with astonishment when she saw this. As an existence with her own unique worldview, the air hostess's sensing ability and observation perspective were so powerful that it was indescribable. If an ordinary person saw the changes on Luo Fan's body, they would only think that Luo Fan was using some kind of divine power to hide himself. However, the air hostess instantly discovered the change in space-time that was hidden in this change. The change in the dimension. That's right. This is the space-time dimension that belongs to me. Luo Fan's voice rang in the air hostess's ears again. However, this voice was completely different from the original voice in its normal state. There was an additional sense of superiority in this voice. In the air hostess's ears, there was an inexplicable roar. She had to try her best to identify it in order to hear what the voice was saying. In the process of hearing it clearly, she sensed countless faintly discernible mysteries. It seemed to be related to the space-time dimension. It seemed to be related to the uniqueness, but it also seemed to be related to the right. This was obviously an in-depth analysis of all the concepts contained in Luo Fan's words. At this moment, the air hostess finally understood what this unique space-time dimension represented. I see. It's only possible to become a true sage by possessing a unique space-time dimension. Without a unique space-time dimension, one would not be able to become a true sage, even if one's worldview was upgraded to the true sage level. She mumbled with a look of realization and anticipation in her eyes, as she said that the unique space-time dimension around Luo Fan's body began to change gradually. In the blink of an eye, it returned to its normal state, and his body reappeared in front of the air hostess. He had already eliminated his unique space-time dimension. I'm only at the initial stage of possessing a unique space-time dimension. Not only is it not perfect, but its relationship with me is also not completely compatible. I still need to carve and cultivate it countless times before I can complete it, Luo Fan said with a sigh. Isn't that normal? If you could do that, you would be a true sage by now, right? The air hostess smiled. Luo Fan smiled and replied, Indeed. After laughing for a while, the air hostess became serious and said, You didn't tell me what would happen if I couldn't find my space-time dimension. Luo Fan's expression gradually became serious when he heard that. He sighed and said, If you can't find it, you'll be trapped in countless space-time dimensions and will never be able to return. Trapped in countless space-time dimensions. The air hostess was shocked. She did not expect the outcome to be so serious. Luo Fan nodded and said, That's right. In that case, you won't be trapped in this misty space forever. Instead, you'll still be able to leave and enter the world. However, the world won't be the same as the world you're in now. Perhaps there'll only be some small differences, or perhaps there'll be earth-shattering changes. You might not even be able to tell that it's similar to the world you're in now. The air hostess' expression became extremely serious when she heard that. Her eyes were filled with hesitation. The benefits that one could obtain from entering the space-time dimension were extremely huge. It could even be said that once one succeeded, one would have the foundation to become a true sage. However, at the same time, the danger that one had to take in entering the space-time dimension was too great. Once one failed, one would be lost in countless space-time dimensions and become something that could be said to exist or not. How could it be so easy to make a decision? At this time, Luo Fan just floated there quietly waiting for her. The misty space-time in front of him was an extremely rare opportunity. It was especially so for the air hostess. After all, the air hostess had yet to comprehend her own space-time dimension. However, the misty space-time in front of him could completely make up for her shortcomings. In contrast, the misty space-time was not that useful to him. After all, although he had yet to truly perfect his own space-time dimension, he had already constructed it in front of him. Under such circumstances, it would not be too difficult for him to enter and retrieve the space-time dimension. In the end, the benefits he would gain would not be too much. At most, he would slightly perfect the space-time dimension that belonged to him. This was also the reason why the air hostess could feel the call of the misty space-time, but he could not. Chapter 1798. I want to go in, the air maiden said firmly after a long while. Have you really thought it through? Luo Fan looked at her and asked with a sigh. This was just a formality. Since he had already said it, how could he not be sure? As expected, the air maiden immediately nodded and said, Yes, I've thought it through. Right now, it seems like I'm constantly moving forward, but only I know that I've actually reached a bottleneck. If this continues, I might need tens of billions or even hundreds of billions of years to break through. I don't want to continue like this. Hearing her determined words, Luo Fan could only sigh. Since you've thought it through, I'll naturally support you. The air maiden was quite reluctant to part with him at that moment, but since she had already made up her mind, she naturally would not waver. She quietly looked at Luo Fan for a long while, as if she wanted to completely engrave everything about him in her heart. Then, she turned around and stepped into the misty space-time before her without saying a word. The misty space shook slightly and instantly swallowed her. In the blink of an eye, she disappeared without a trace. As she disappeared into the misty space, the endless distorted figures of Luo Fan and the air maiden in the space-time distorted again. Then, all the figures changed completely. Originally, they were in pairs, but now, they became a single person. In each group, only Luo Fan was left. The air maiden beside him had already disappeared without a trace, as if she had never been there. As expected, they're looking at me the same way I'm looking at them. At that moment, such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. The air maiden entered the misty space and disappeared beside him. Beside the countless figures that he saw, the air maiden also disappeared. This corresponded to him one by one. What this meant couldn't be any clearer. His heart trembled. With a sigh, he also lifted his foot and stepped into the misty space. As he stepped into it, the mist surged once again. In the blink of an eye, his figure had already disappeared without a trace. Similarly, when he disappeared, the countless silhouettes in the mist also disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never happened before. With this change, this misty space gradually returned to its original appearance when Luo Fan and air hostess first saw it. The fluctuation that had guided the space maiden had completely disappeared. This is the intersection of countless space-time dimensions. The one who spoke was Luo Fan. However, at this moment, he was not in the haze that he had expected. Instead, he was in an extremely mysterious place, in an extremely strange space-time. This space-time looked like a vast and boundless universe. In this place, there were countless stars. These stars adorned the vast and boundless pitch-black void, and they revealed an indescribable grandeur and vastness. One couldn't help but feel enlightened when looking at it. In the space-time, he could feel the aura that belonged to him filling every area of the space-time. This aura was so dense. He even suspected that it was inside his body. This space-time must have been created by me. Or, to be more specific, it was created by me in this space-time dimension. Only in this way could this space-time have such a dense aura that belongs to me. With a flash in his heart, Luo Fan reacted and understood what was going on. His heart trembled slightly, and his perception swept over. In an instant, the entire world was shrouded in his perception. An endless stream of light and shadows, as well as an endless stream of information, flowed through his mind in an instant. It allowed him to know the situation of this world in an instant. This part of the world was extremely powerful, which could be distinguished through the aura. It had gone through 7 great tribulations of heaven and earth. Behind this world, the layer of laws did not spread across the world in layers. Instead, it existed in an even stranger and more wondrous way. In this way, it was layer by layer. In other words, the law layer didn't spread out horizontally, nor did it cover the entire space-time of this world. Instead, it covered the space-time in a discontinuous manner. and the distribution of the law layer overlapped with the countless stars in this universe. In other words, every star corresponded to a layer of laws, and every layer of laws corresponded to a star. Whether it was a star, a planet, or a meteor, whether it was a comet or a meteorite, whether it was a living being or not, every star had its own law layer. Just like where Luo Fan stood at this moment, the law layer was so thin that it almost didn't exist. And this kind of structure resulted in a result. And that was that where he stood, apart from the normal time and space, there was nothing else. Even power didn't exist anymore. For an ordinary cultivator, this kind of structure would be a land of death. However, for him, it was a place that he could easily control. Rather than calling this a world, it's better to call it a cluster of worlds connected in a special way. How did I, who is in this space-time dimension, come up with the idea of opening up such a world? With this thought flashing in his mind, he lifted his foot and took a light step forward, heading towards the most powerful star in this world. Although they were in different dimensions of time and space, they were still closely connected. Luo Fan thought according to his own way of thinking. If he were to create this world, then the true core of this world would definitely be the location of the strongest star in the universe. Just as he had said before, in this cosmic void that only had time and space, without any other substance or power, he could control it like never before. In fact, he was traveling at a speed much faster than in other spacetimes. He had already traversed a distance of who knew how many billions of light years and arrived before an extremely huge star. This was a star. It felt as if it occupied the entire world, or rather, 1/10 of the entire universe. Just its diameter alone would probably be calculated in billions or trillions of light years. It would probably be calculated in billions or trillions of light years, not to mention the range of its power and the area of influence of its law layer. It was so vast that it was unimaginably vast. There must be layers of space-time in here. Looking at the vast star, this thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Although this star had the structure of a planet, it did not move for a long time and did not even rotate on its own. Around this planet, there were countless stars constantly rotating around this star in an extremely mysterious way. This mysterious method created a result that ordinary living beings could not understand, and that was, in any region of the planet, there was no place on the planet that could withstand it. In any region on this star, one could only see a sun during the day and a moon at night. Apart from that, all the other stars had become stars. The structure of such stars and stars was so wonderful that Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim in his heart. At this moment, standing outside this star, it was difficult to distinguish the true appearance of the surrounding stars at a glance. All that could be seen was a faint silver mist shrouding the entire star. Or, to put it more vividly, the star in front of him looked like a cocoon of light with hazy edges, constantly contracting and vibrating. All sorts of inconceivable lights and shadows appeared, and on this star, there were countless living beings. There was also an almost limitless number of cultivators. Among these cultivators, the strongest had reached the level of a third-level Supreme Emperor, and there were hundreds of them. Even though these third-level Supreme Emperors did not have innate, inextinguishable spiritual light and could not be considered true third-level Supreme Emperors. But this number alone was already much greater than the perfect world that Luo Fan had passed through before. These Supreme Emperors were evenly distributed all over this star. Their auras covered a very large area. They controlled everything in this area and harmonized the rules and laws within it. They were like this. It could even be said to be supreme, and it was not much different from the Creator. And this was only the situation on the surface of this star. Inside this star, but there were layers upon layers of space-time. With just a glance from Luo Fan, the number of space-time was already calculated in the billions. Moreover, the number of these space-time was constantly changing. Almost every moment, there were countless space-times being annihilated and countless space-times being born at every moment. Between birth and destruction, an indescribable balance was formed, allowing the trillions of space-times to possess all sorts of indescribable vitality. What a wonderful space-time! With that thought in mind, Luo Fan stepped through the layers of countless stars and arrived on the surface of the star. Upon arriving here, he already understood why this star could be so huge. In fact, if this entire star relied on its own power, it would not be able to exist completely. However, according to the laws of the world, it formed a whole with the billions of stars around it, relying on the power of the stars to form an extremely delicate balance. This delicate balance counteracted the terrifying gravitational force produced by the star itself, and also counteracted the power that caused the star to collapse, thus allowing the star to exist for a long time without collapsing. At this moment, Luo Fan was standing on a tall mountain on the surface of this star. This mountain was tens of thousands of light years tall. Even if he stood at the top of the mountain, he could only see a boundless land at a glance. It was as if he was standing in a vast world with a round sky and square earth. It was impossible to tell that this was a mountain. How could such a mountain exist in an ordinary world? However, on this star, this mountain could only be considered a small hill. With Luo Fan's macroscopic perspective, he could see that there were countless mountains that were hundreds of millions of light years tall. After withdrawing his macroscopic perspective and looking up at the only sun in the sky, Luo Fan could not help but exclaim in admiration again. For such a mountain that was tens of thousands of light years tall, it would take tens of thousands of years for light to travel from the top of the mountain to the foot of the mountain. It was naturally impossible for it to only have one star to provide light for it. In fact, there were also countless stars revolving around this mountain, providing light for it. There were also countless stars revolving around the mountain, providing light to the mountain. As for the orbit of each star, it was impossible to calculate the frequency of each star. If an astronomer were to calculate the rotation frequency of each star on an ordinary technological planet, he would not be able to calculate it. Even if billions of astronomers spent hundreds of years, they would not be able to calculate it clearly. This mountain was divided into hundreds of millions of layers. Each layer was independent of each other, and all kinds of strange civilizations were born among them. Some were closely related to each other, some cooperated with each other, and some hated each other. However, they evolved into a magnificent history of civilization development. Of course, this was only true for ordinary creatures. For cultivators, this was true. Although this mountain wasn't small, it wasn't too big either. Here, there were only a few sections. It's a pity that the mark of the Creator was not completely removed in the end. In the end, the only creatures that can reach the top of the food chain in this world are still born with Taoism aptitude. Luo Fan could not help but sigh after watching for a while. Although this mountain peak alone had given birth to so many civilizations, the appearances of so many civilizations at the highest level were extremely similar. They were all similar to Luo Fan at this time, and they all looked like born with Taoism aptitude. This situation was very obvious. It was because of the influence of his mark in this space-time dimension. It was just like the world that Luo Fan had created. After passing through the eighth great tribulation of the heavens and earth, all of his imprints had been eliminated, and the world had become more and more diverse. Not only had the orthodoxy of the cultivators changed, even the species of creatures that were born had also begun to surge. Before Luo Fan stepped into that misty space and came to this space-time dimension, there were already tens of thousands of new species that began to develop intelligence. They were vaguely challenging the dominance of the born with Taoism aptitude creatures. Who are you? At this time, a cold snort sounded in Luo Fan's ears. This cold snort was followed by this snort. The surrounding temperature seemed to have suddenly dropped by a few hundred degrees, and even the ground was making crackling sounds. It was as if the ground had been frozen and cracked. Luo Fan frowned and snorted softly. This wave of coldness disappeared completely in an instant. Everything around him was completely restored to its original state. Since you're already here, why bother hiding? After turning the surroundings back to its original state, he said calmly. As he said this, a muffled snort was heard in the void. Amidst the muffled snort, a figure seemed to be dragged by a powerful, invisible force through the void, directly appearing not far in front of Luo Fan, and smashing hard into the ground. This figure was a level 3 Supreme Martial Emperor. However, at this time, all of the power in his body had been completely sealed. It seemed that only his body was countless times stronger than that of ordinary creatures, and his level did not seem to be too high. At this time, the level 3 Supreme Emperor's expression was extremely ugly, and there was indescribable fear and shock in his eyes. "How'd you find me?" Luo Fan looked at him and asked curiously. At this time, how could this level 3 Supreme Emperor not understand that the difference between him and this person before him was like the difference between heaven and earth? At this time, facing Luo Fan's question, although he was very unhappy and unwilling, he could only answer honestly. "Everything in this area is under my control. The moment Your Excellency arrived, although there were no disturbances, Your Excellency's presence still oppressed the presence of this area. Naturally, there were traces of Your Excellency's presence, which was why I was able to discover it." Hearing this, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. So that's how it is. I didn't expect it to be a sense of presence. Something like a sense of presence, as long as it existed, it would naturally have it. Even if it was something that no one could remember and would naturally be forgotten as long as one looked away, it would still have a sense of presence. It was just that the sense of presence was a little strange. "You don't recognize me?" Suddenly, Luo Fan sensed that this level 3 Supreme Emperor was unfamiliar with him, and he frowned and asked. Although this part of the world was so strange and mysterious, it was definitely created by him from another space-time dimension. And he was definitely extremely similar to his own self in this space-time dimension. Under normal circumstances, if this level 3 Supreme Emperor knew about the creator of this world, he would obviously recognize him. That level 3 Supreme Emperor looked at Luo Fan with an inexplicable gaze and said, "Of course I don't know you. If I knew you, why would I appear before you just now?" This was a matter of course. If he knew Luo Fan, he would naturally know how strong he was. If they knew that he was strong, how could they have come to find trouble with Luo Fan just because he didn't inform him before coming to his territory? Then do you know who the creator of this world is? Luo Fan frowned and asked. The creator of this world is the god of creation, Luo Fan. At this moment, the level 3 Supreme Emperor's eyes revealed an inexplicable fanaticism as he said this. From the looks of it, he seemed to be warning Luo Fan that he also had a backer, and that if he knew what was good for him, he should hurry up and leave, lest he embarrasses himself. God of creation, Luo Fan. When Luo Fan heard this, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just as he didn't know whether to laugh or cry, an inexplicable doubt arose in his heart. What on earth is the me in this space-time dimension doing? Why does this level 3 Supreme Emperor only know of me and have never seen me before? Chapter 1799. At this moment, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He seemed to have sensed something, and he abruptly turned his head to look at a certain spot in the void. Yenef, he couldn't help but frown at what he saw, because a dense expanse of 23 third-rank monarchs were hiding behind that expanse of space. Moreover, these third-grade Supreme Emperors weren't scattered and independent. Instead, they were united, forming an indescribable formation of many third-grade Supreme Emperors. How could they react so quickly? As this thought flashed across his mind, he raised his hand and clapped. With a soft poof, the void cracked, and the level 3 Supreme Emperors hidden behind the void were revealed as they cried out in surprise. This change made the level 3 Supreme Emperor in front of Luo Fan change his expression drastically. How is this possible? At this moment, he heard a voice of disbelief. This was the voice of a level 3 Supreme Emperor that he was extremely familiar with. This level 3 Supreme Emperor was extremely powerful, and in this area, he could be considered an invincible existence. He had never thought that he would hear such an incredulous voice coming from his mouth. He had never expected that such an almost invincible expert would actually lose his composure like this. Could it be that this person is really so powerful? This thought finally surfaced in his mind. The Level 3 Supreme Emperor, who was invincible in this area, was a cultivator who looked like a young man. He wasn't overly handsome, but there was an indescribable majesty around him. As he stood in the void, it was as if the entire world was celebrating his arrival, and many faint phenomena appeared. At this time, the young man looked at Luo Fan with a look of disbelief and shouted, "Who are you? How did you discover us?" "I'm just using the world authority to slightly conceal myself." "Do you really think that's an invincible technique?" Luo Fan frowned. He did not hold back and clapped again. In an instant, all of the Level 3 Supreme Emperors apart from him were enveloped by an extremely powerful force. With a single tremor, they were sent tens of thousands of light years away, plunging into the pitch-black void outside this gigantic planet. Among them, including the Level 3 Supreme Emperor that Luo Fan had discovered earlier. This action finally revealed his true strength. At this moment, an indescribable fear surged in the young man's heart. It was as if a hand was tightly clutching his heart. Even I wouldn't be able to hold on if 3 or 4 people attacked me at the same time. To think that he could subdue all of them so easily. Many thoughts flashed through the young man's mind, and his expression became complicated. At this time, Luo Fan asked faintly, "What's your name?" The young man gritted his teeth and said, "I am Shui." "Shui, that's a good name." Luo Fan took a glance and instantly sensed the complicated aura of the water source in the body of the person in front of him. He couldn't help but praise. This praise clearly did not make the young man's expression change for the better. On the contrary, the arrogance contained within the praise made him feel an indescribable sense of humiliation. His mood became worse and worse. "Have you seen me before?" Luo Fan was naturally not in the mood to care about his feelings, and he only asked faintly. The young man was stunned. This kind of question was really strange. He was already in existence of this level. Did he need someone else to confirm whether or not he had seen him before? However, since he was not as strong as the other party, he could only answer the other party's question honestly. At this moment, he looked at Luo Fan with rapt attention. He carefully searched through his memory, trying to find someone similar to the person in front of him. After a long time, he shook his head and said, "I have never seen you before. You have never seen me before. Then, have you seen the creator of this world?" Luo Fan asked faintly. Shui was taken aback. There was an inexplicable vigilance in his eyes as he said, "What do you want to do? Do you want to destroy this part of the world?" Destroy this part of the world. Luo Fan couldn't help but find it funny. If there was no benefit in destroying the world, who would do it? With his cultivation, what was the point of destroying the world to him? At this moment, he just shook his head lightly and said, "Of course not. However, this has nothing to do with you. Answer my question." Shui heaved a sigh of relief at this moment. Although Luo Fan just denied it, he already believed it. After all, at this moment, there seemed to be no need for the expert in front of him to lie to him. "I have never seen him before," Shui said at once. "Since you have never seen him before, how do you know that the creator of this world is the god of creation, Luo Fan?" Luo Fan said with a frown, "This is common knowledge that has been deeply engraved in our hearts since we were born." "Of course we know," Shui said with a frown. As he spoke, he looked at Luo Fan with a doubtful gaze. Obviously, the common-sense question that Luo Fan asked made him start to doubt his origins. Luo Fan ignored his doubts and just asked, "So, you have cultivated for so many years. Have you ever calculated the possible location of the god of creation, Luo Fan?" Shui's eyes showed even more vigilance. "You want to deal with the god of creation?" As he spoke, the water in his body surged. In an instant, the water formed by the water directly piled up around his body, thin and small, like a cloud of smoke. With this change, the surrounding space-time began to tremble slightly, and even the laws in this area began to surge at this moment. One could faintly feel an indescribable power brewing in the void. This power was so terrifying that once it erupted, it would not be spared from the destruction of thousands of sectors. It seems that I have done quite well in another space-time dimension. At this moment, Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. In this space-time dimension, he could actually make almost all the cultivators in this world become brainless fans without showing up. Seeing Luo Fan's calm expression, Shui, he was convinced of his thoughts. Without waiting for Luo Fan to react, he roared, "You want to hurt the god of creation? Go to hell." As he spoke, the space-time formed by the countless water sources around his body released a power that could destroy heaven and earth. In an instant, it merged with the power brewing in the void and blasted towards Luo Fan from all directions. This power was so terrifying, so shocking. Under this power, the void shattered into pieces. Even a mountain that was tens of thousands of light years high under his feet could not withstand the explosion of this terrifying power. It began to shake violently. Huge cracks even began to spread from this location to the entire mountain. In just a short moment, it had already penetrated the mountain that was tens of thousands of light years high. In just a short moment, the mountain had already been wrapped by this incomparably huge and short spiderweb. It looked like it would completely collapse in the next moment, turning into countless fragments that poured in all directions. In just this instant, who knows how many civilizations on this mountain had already welcomed great damage. There were even a few civilizations that instantly ushered in a disaster because of this change. In the blink of an eye, they were already completely wiped out. However, at this moment, Shui, he didn't care about this change at all. At this moment, his eyes were like the turbulent sea, showing an incomparably explosive emotion. He tightly locked onto Luo Fan. Under his control, the power coming from the surrounding water sources and the power blasting down from the void frantically gathered towards Luo Fan. In the face of such an impact, Luo Fan just smiled faintly. Such an attack before him. In terms of quantity, it was indeed worthy of being at the level of a level 3 Supreme Emperor. However, in terms of quality, even compared to the level 3 Supreme Emperor who had grasped the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, it was still far inferior, let alone to Luo Fan. At this moment, facing this attack, he didn't even need to use the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. With a thought, a spiritual light sprinkled out from his hand, connecting and changing in the void. It formed a long river, and with a turn, all the power was completely gathered into that long river. Then, the long river formed by this spiritual light trembled slightly, and the power was completely shattered, leaving not a trace behind. Seeing this change, Shui Yi's eyes were filled with disbelief. But at this moment, he already didn't have any words of how is this possible. He just let out a loud roar, and the most fundamental power in his body frantically rushed out of his body, instantly fusing with the surrounding laws. He directly used his own authority to completely control the surrounding laws. As the layer of laws fell into his control, he directly manipulated every strand of laws in this layer of laws. Every law changed, and the confrontation between them completely disappeared. All the power was gathered in an instant, completely transforming into a destructive force that rushed towards Luo Fan. The law layer itself was something that determined how the 4 basic existences of normal space-time existed, and how they changed. Now, under the control of the water will, everything was destroyed, and the space-time within a radius of several light years was completely changed. It was as if this space-time had suddenly become chaotic. The earth was in the sky, water flowed higher, and so on. These were all relatively orderly changes. Everything else, including the expected and unimaginable changes, all came together to make this place so strange. Facing such changes, Luo Fan still didn't care. He raised his hand, and in an instant, the long river of spiritual light in front of him trembled slightly. In an instant, the chaotic, destructive power released by the laws and laws, as well as the 4 basic existences around it, was instantly sucked into this long river. Then, with a shake of the long river, it completely disappeared. This was a simulation of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Its power was so strong that unless one's understanding of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was deeper than Luo Fan's, or one had a magic treasure bestowed by a true saint, no power could destroy it. However, this time, he already didn't intend to let the level 3 Emperor before him make a move. With a slight thought, he casually tapped on it. He directly tapped on the forehead of the level 3 Supreme Emperor. The third level Supreme Emperor sensed that all of his power had disappeared. Even his senses had been weakened to an unimaginable level. Not much stronger than a mortal's, it's been taken away. A deep sorrow instantly appeared on the face of this level 3 Supreme Emperor. Following the loss of his power, his manipulation and changes to the law layer naturally and completely disappeared. Under the effect of the surrounding vast layers of laws, this layer of laws was extremely powerful. He quickly recovered. Of course, although the law layer had been restored, the light and shadow that had been transformed due to the changes in the law layer had not completely recovered. At the very least, the terrain beneath their feet had completely changed. This was originally the peak of a mountain peak with countless cracks. But at this moment, this place had already turned into an ocean that stretched as far as the eye could see. At the edge of the ocean, where the hill used to be, the seawater formed a cone shape. It slowly flowed downwards, but there was no sign of it flowing down because it had lost its support. This appearance was obviously the result of the law layer condensing again. In the process of restoring itself, there were still some distortions caused by the previous damage. In the end, it still couldn't completely return to its original state. However, this was all. For Luo Fan and that Shui who were here at this time, it was only secondary. None of them paid any attention to it. Why do you revere the god of creation so much? Luo Fan asked faintly. He was indeed quite curious about this. He believed that he wasn't a person who could be worshipped by others to the point of disregarding himself. At least, in his self-awareness, he wasn't such a person. If he was like this, then he should be like this in this space-time dimension. Since that was the case, why would this level 3 Emperor in front of him worship him in this space-time dimension so much? The god of creation created us. Shouldn't we worship him? Shui stared at Luo Fan. His eyes were almost spewing flames, crippling himself and questioning the god of creation that he worshipped. No matter which one it was enough to make him perish together with the god of creation. Moreover, Luo Fan actually made both mistakes at the same time. Perhaps he created you just to test the power of creation. Luo Fan said faintly. So what? Creation is creation. No matter what the purpose is, the result won't change. Shui said indifferently. Hearing this, Luo Fan could only smile and said, "Don't worry, my relationship with your god of creation is closer than you think." As he spoke, he casually threw Shui in front of him to the sea below, causing him to scream and crash into the sea. Although the power of this level 3 Supreme Emperor had been sealed by him, and even his perception had been weakened, and his body level had also been reduced, he was still a level 3 Supreme Emperor after all. Moreover, he was a level 3 Supreme Emperor who controlled water. Not to mention that it was just an ordinary ocean. Even the legendary Roi Shui would not be able to harm him in the slightest. Therefore, although Luo Fan's actions were casual, he wasn't trying to take his life. After sending this person away, countless runes, lines, and shadows flashed across Luo Fan's eyes. Let me see where your cave abode is in this space-time dimension. With this thought flashing across his mind, he calculated even more attentively. All sorts of situations in this world were constantly appearing in his mind as he divined. Countless truths and mysteries were constantly emerging in his mind during this process. After a few days, his eyes suddenly lit up. Found it. Then he suddenly raised his head and looked at a certain void in this world. Over the past few days, countless cultivators had explored this place, and many experts had even tried to test him. However, in the end, they were all blocked by Shui. In the end, they didn't cause any trouble for Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan was calculating the location of his cave abode in this space-time dimension, he still saw all of these developments. Now that the calculation was completed, he was in a great mood. With a point of his finger, an inexplicable force gushed out from his hand. It penetrated through layers of space-time and directly entered the body of Shui, who was trying hard to recover his strength in the depths of space-time. As the force poured into Shui's body, the powerful suppressive force that had sealed him for several days instantly collapsed. Infinite power began to gush out from the depths of his body. His perception and body also began to skyrocket in the process. In the blink of an eye, he had already recovered the appearance of a level 3 Supreme Emperor. "Why did you let me go?" Shui's expression was both surprised and puzzled. "I'm in a good mood," Luo Fan said faintly. After saying that, his figure flashed and turned into a ray of light, heading towards the location of his cave abode in this space-time that he had calculated a few days ago. That location was hidden in an extremely mysterious and well-hidden place. It was almost impossible to reach this place using ordinary means. Even if one searched the world, it would still be impossible to find it. Chapter 1800. Luo Fan crossed many space-times and arrived at a strange place in the blink of an eye. This place was also a void of the universe. However, compared to the completely unfamiliar cosmic void in the outside world, the universe in front of him was very familiar, as though it had been dug out from his heart. It seems that this is the cave abode. With a jolt of his heart, he instantly understood what it was. Even if it was a different space-time dimension, it was still himself. No matter how many changes there were, on a certain fundamental level, there would definitely be similarities. The structure of the cave abode in front of him was obviously such an existence. If it were me, I would place the place of cultivation in. As he thought to himself, he lifted his feet and took a light step forward. His body had already arrived at a flat surface in the middle of the universe. It's really here. At this moment, an inexplicable smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. The moment he stood there, the flat surface below him began to change. Countless lights and shadows flowed, and all the scenes in the outside world instantly flashed across the flat surface. As his thoughts changed, the countless lights and shadows constantly changed, and countless details that he was interested in were revealed in the lights and shadows. Looking at the various scenes, after a long time, he let out a long sigh. Now he understood what the him in this space-time dimension was thinking. The him in this space-time dimension did not have the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. But this world was used by him to fight against the disciples of a true sage. It was precisely because of this that the various structures of this world and all the rules were used to enhance the strength of this world and to strengthen the attacking power of this world. Therefore, this world had become like this. A terrifyingly huge planet that was equivalent to condensing most of the power of this world into one place and carrying it out inside the star. Countless complicated changes were carried out and eventually turned into an existence similar to the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. In the end, it was enough to increase his fighting power by many times. In fact, it was also because of this that no disciples of a true sage could enter this world. In the past, there had been a few disciples of a true sage who had entered this world, but they were chased out by the terrifying power of this space-time dimension. However, why is this structure a little strange? After solving a doubt, he suddenly had another doubt. Although the general structure of this world was special, he already knew what was going on. However, some of the deeper structures were beyond his understanding. For example, the combination of many laws. He tried to understand it from the perspective of the world of laws, but no matter how he looked at it, he felt that there was a better construction method that could achieve the same goal. However, there were some methods that could achieve their goals in a way that even his worldview couldn't. The more he observed, the more puzzled he became. After pondering for a long time, suddenly, a flash of inspiration flashed across his mind. The me of this space-time dimension. His worldview is not the worldview of laws. Thinking of this, all his previous doubts were quickly dispelled. all the questions that could not be answered. At this moment, all the answers appeared in his mind, causing him to comprehend many things in a trance. So that's how it is. He looked down at the constantly changing light and shadow on the flat surface. Luo Fan's heart was filled with inexplicable complex emotions. This was the first time he had truly felt the difference between different space-time dimensions. However, thinking about it, it was only natural, a unique space-time dimension. It was developed from his own foundation, from his own essence. Since even his own space-time dimension was different, it naturally represented a fundamental and essential difference. And this difference, in turn, naturally caused a difference in worldview. In this way, it was not surprising that his worldview in a different space-time dimension would be different from the worldview of laws. After thinking about all this, the complex emotions in his heart gradually faded, and a happy smile gradually appeared on his face. Different selves, different worldviews. If he could comprehend them, he would definitely be able to comprehend them by analogy, making his worldview more perfect, allowing him to improve and attract his second great tribulation. With a slight thought in his heart, he no longer focused his attention on other things. Instead, he focused on the countless laws of heaven and earth that were different from the worldview of laws. These countless differences were how he comprehended his worldview in this space-time dimension through his own worldview of laws. Path. In the blink of an eye, countless structures, innumerable differences, and innumerable similarities appeared in his mind. In a trance, his worldview of laws was inexplicably impacted again and again. Every impact would bring a strong shock to his view of the world. While his view of the world was shaken subtly, it also strengthened his view of the world. It was as if his view of the world was being tempered, constantly climbing and advancing toward a more perfect direction. Time slowly passed during this process. Under Luo Fan's comprehension, the layers of the laws of heaven and earth were continuously uncovered by him. His perception and will gradually penetrated into the depths of the layers of laws, and the outline of his own worldview of this space-time dimension became clearer and clearer. In a trance, 10,000 years had passed. On this day, Luo Fan's heart trembled. A powerful, invisible force acted on his perception, causing him to discover that the core of the laws of heaven and earth, which he had already come into contact with, was getting further and further away from his perception. In the end, it completely disappeared, allowing his perception to return to normal. What a pity. Knowing in his heart that this was already his limit, Luo Fan could only sigh inwardly and stop his original exploration behavior. There was a repulsive force between different worldviews. Even if he was in a different space-time dimension, he couldn't eliminate the repulsive force. It was like two different computer systems. The more perfect a computer system was, the more similar it would be on the surface. If one only looked at the surface, at first glance, there wouldn't be much difference between the two computer systems. And even the running software might be almost exactly the same. However, this was only on the surface. If one delved into the depths of these two computer systems and delved into their source code, there would be a world of difference between the two. If a slight contact between two complete systems, such as through the internet, wouldn't have much impact. Then, at this deep level, at the source code level, once the two came into contact with each other, both systems would inevitably be damaged at the same time. Now, for Luo Fan, his own worldview was a system, and what he sorted out in this space-time dimension was a completely different system. Therefore, the repulsive force appeared. Obviously, it was natural. The appearance of the repulsive force also meant that he had also come into contact with the core of this worldview. After coming back to his senses, Luo Fan's heart moved slightly, sensing his second major disaster. In an instant, he found that the second major disaster was much clearer than before. It was also much stronger. At a glance, he knew that he had made great progress compared to before. At this moment, an inexplicable voice came into Luo Fan's ears. "Hey, so someone is already here." This voice was so familiar. It made Luo Fan remember it as soon as he heard it. However, He couldn't react for a while whose voice it was. That name seemed to have come to his mouth. But when he wanted to spit it out, he found that he had forgotten this name. This indescribable feeling made him feel at a loss, which was rare for him. After a while, he suddenly realized, this is my own voice. He discovered this. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, but he already understood what was going on. This must be him from another space-time dimension. With a thought, he casually brushed the void in front of him. In an instant, a passage appeared, leading beyond the layers of space-time, revealing a natural scene. There was a figure floating there. Although the clothes were different, the figure's face was almost identical to his. Me from another space-time dimension. The two smiled at the same time and spoke at the same time. Compared to Luo Fan inside, the aura of Luo Fan outside the passage was a little weaker, and the divine light in his eyes was also a little dimmer. Of course, it was only a little bit. The two noticed this in an instant, and their expressions changed slightly. I didn't expect you to be one step ahead of me. Now, you should have sensed the second major disaster, right? Luo Fan outside the passage sighed and said. As he spoke, he had already crossed the passage and appeared on the surface. He was only a few feet away from Luo Fan. He looked Luo Fan up and down, and there was a kind of understanding and joy in his eyes. Luo Fan was quite familiar with this look. It was the expression he had when he had comprehended a certain principle or a certain mystery from something. At this moment, he had already understood that he, who was in another space-time dimension, must have comprehended something useful for his cultivation. At that moment, he did not stop her. In fact, with a faint smile on his face, he completely revealed the source of his life, which was the manifestation of the world of laws. In an instant, the place where he was turned into a world of its own, a world that was incomparably mysterious and profound, yet fundamentally incompatible with any other world in the outside world had appeared. The eyes of Luo Fan in another space-time dimension lit up. He laughed and said, "It really is me." With a sway of his body, his life source was also revealed, and a worldview was also manifested. However, compared to Luo Fan's manifestation of the manifestation of the world was a little crude, and the world seemed a little fragile. Luo Fan didn't care about this at all. At this moment, he didn't care if his world was comprehended by the other party. He was wholeheartedly comprehending the other party's world and comprehending the world that the other party revealed. He didn't ask what the other party's world was, and the other party didn't ask him what the other party's world was. After the first few sentences, the two of them didn't say a word. They just wholeheartedly comprehended the other party's world and looked for the various mysteries of the other party's world, comprehending the various characteristics of the other party's world. Although the other party's world was not as complete and perfect as Luo Fan's, Luo Fan wasn't disappointed. There was only indescribable excitement, because the other party's world was completely different from his world. The other party had a description of any worldview, but it was described in a completely different way. The development of every law was also carried out in a completely different way. For him, this was simply like revealing another path to the goal he wanted to achieve. It was as if he had revealed another path to the goal he wanted to achieve. It was as if another path to the goal he wanted to achieve had been revealed. It went without saying. Time flew. In a trance, 1,000 years had passed. At a certain moment, both Luo Fans were shocked and recovered from the other party's worldview. Their own worldview and the manifestation of the world began to converge. They retracted back into their bodies. They turned into life source. Their figures gradually appeared in front of each other. It's a pity, but there's no other way. Luo Fan sighed. Indeed. However, I can already faintly feel the second robbery. Luo Fan, who was in a different space-time dimension, laughed. Congratulations. Luo Fan smiled slightly. Both of them had made great progress in the past 1,000 years. The Luo Fan in another space-time dimension could already sense the existence of the second Great Tribulation. His progress was even greater. Now, he could already faintly confirm that his second Great Tribulation would occur in 10 billion years. The two looked at each other and smiled. At that moment, Luo Fan said, "I'll leave this place to you. Of course, if you go to my space-time dimension one day in the future, don't laugh." The Luo Fan in another space-time dimension laughed. From the looks of it, it was obvious that he had made great progress compared to back then. When he recalled the world that he had opened back then, he felt a little ashamed. Luo Fan smiled slightly and said, "You are me, and I am you. What's so funny about it?" At that moment, he didn't say any more nonsense. With a thought, he slowly changed the space-time dimension around his body. In an instant, the space-time around his body began to distort slightly. The space-time dimension and the space-time dimension began to produce subtle changes. In the end, they combined with each other, causing his figure to gradually become blurry. In the end, when he pushed the space-time dimension to a certain limit, there was an indescribable force that acted on his body and began to pull him to a certain place in the nothingness. With a soft poof, his figure had already left the space-time dimension and stepped into a misty place. In the space-time dimension where he had left, the Luo Fan in another space-time dimension looked at Luo Fan who had disappeared in front of him and shook his head with a sigh. The mysteries of the space-time dimension are really deep and unfathomable. This was the first time he had seen someone leave a space-time dimension. Obviously, this process had stimulated his soul and made him feel the profound truth of the space-time dimension once again. After lamenting for a while, he shook his head and came to the place where Luo Fan had originally stood. With a thought, the light and shadow below him kept changing, showing a light and shadow similar to what Luo Fan had shown back then. Obviously, he was also experiencing and observing the hidden rules of the space-time dimension. This was the worldview of Luo Fan in this space-time dimension. There was no need to say more about this. At this moment, after Luo Fan left the space-time dimension through the repulsion of the space-time dimension, he suddenly felt that he had stepped into the inexplicable misty place that he had entered when he had communicated with different space-time dimensions. Before he could see his surroundings clearly, he felt the world around him spin, and the changes of countless space-time dimensions acted on his body. Immediately after, his figure had already arrived in another world. I still can't see that process. With this somewhat regretful thought, Luo Fan looked around. This time, this world still had a strong aura that belonged to him. Judging from the traces of the Great Tribulation in the aura, this world had already gone through 7 Great Tribulations. Obviously, this was a world that had also been created by Luo Fan, but he had not gone through the 8th Great Tribulation and completely destroyed his imprint. However, this world was not as strange as the previous one. Although it still looked like a boundless starry sky, there was no longer a huge planet that occupied 1/10 of the universe like before. In this part of the universe, stars were normal stars and planets were normal planets. Countless life forms and civilizations lived on the many stars. Among them, some were on planets, some were on stars, and some were even the misty nebulae. The various types of phenomena made Luo Fan feel as if he had returned to the universe on Earth after the world had shattered. However, this was of course just an illusion. This was because he quickly sensed the uniqueness of this world. Above this world, of course, was not above in terms of position, but above in terms of space-time energy. There was a boundless space-time, and above this space-time, there's another space-time that was almost as vast. Just like that, the cycle went on, and in the end, it went on for tens of thousands of times. Tens of thousands of space-time. Just how insane is this ascension system? Sensing this, he could not help but complain. Chapter 1801. After roughly looking at the structure of the tens of thousands of space-times, Luo Fan focused his attention on the starry sky in front of him. This starry sky was vast and boundless. Vast and boundless. From what he could sense, it was probably as vast as a few 100 trillion light years. However, the living beings in this universe were not of a high level. At the very least, there were no more than 10,000 beings equivalent to immortals, or in other words, itinerant immortals, in the entire void of the universe. This number might seem like a lot, but if one were to look at it from the perspective of trillions of light years across the entire universe, one would know just how rare and rare it was. Even these beings who had reached the level of immortals were in all kinds of special states. They were either in deep sleep or in some kind of seal. In short, almost none of them could fully exert their strength. What kind of person was Luo Fan? In an instant, he knew what was going on with them. Normally speaking, it was impossible for these living beings to remain in this world. However, they relied on various special methods to seal themselves so that their level did not exceed the tolerance limit of this universe. That was why they could barely remain in this universe. With a thought, he lifted his foot and took a light step forward. In a flash, he arrived inside a star and appeared in a flame space. There was a creature that had reached the level of an immortal sleeping here. Arriving here, what was imprinted in Luo Fan's eyes was an endless blazing flame. This kind of flame was tens of thousands of times more powerful than ordinary flames. Even space itself seemed to distort inexplicably under its scorching heat. In fact, the flame space-time in front of him was formed because of the burning of this kind of flame. In this space-time that was condensed from flames, there was a creature made of flames lying on the ground. This flame creature seemed to have a human form, but its whole body was condensed from flames. However, his entire body was condensed from flames, and he looked like a human-shaped flame. The size of this creature was quite shocking. It was tens of thousands of feet tall. At this moment, it was lying on its side in the center of the flame space-time. Around it, there were flames burning, twisting, and licking at it. At this moment, his breathing was extremely long. Every time he breathed, there would be flames swallowing and spitting out. In the eyes of ordinary mortals, such a figure was a terrifying and powerful monster. They would probably have nightmares just by looking at it. However, to an existence like Luo Fan, all of this was merely an illusion. At this moment, he glanced over and instantly saw the spirit of this creature. This creature's soul was also in a deep slumber. It was located at the location of the heart. As for his spirit, although it looked like it was also made of flames, he could see the essence in its core that did not belong to flames. This kind of essence, it was extremely mysterious. It had an extremely close connection with the laws of this world. At every moment, he was exchanging all sorts of information with the law layer. Not only did he obtain the countless mysteries of the world from the law layer, he had also comprehended all sorts of profound mysteries. All sorts of inspirations were continuously poured into the layer of laws, providing resources for the growth of the world. In fact, it was also a characteristic of all the creatures that cultivated in this world. Compared to any other world, all the cultivators in this world were constantly exchanging information with the laws of this world. It was just that the more powerful the living being was, the more powerful it was. However, the more powerful the creatures were, the more profound the information they poured into the law layer. And the lower the realm, the more information they could obtain from the law layer. As a result, when living beings reached a certain level of power, they would naturally be able to control a certain range of rules and laws through the information they poured into the rules and laws. This kind of control over space-time formed a strange domain that made them like gods of creation. Within this domain, they could do countless things that they couldn't do in the outside world. It was just like the reason why the space-time that appeared inside the star was so stable, and the reason why all the fire's construction power contributed to the construction of space-time was because of the itinerant immortal's influence on the layer of laws and laws. In other words, this space-time was about to transform into this creature's domain. With a thought, Luo Fan casually waved his hand in the air. In an instant, the creature made of flames in front of him disintegrated. All of its organs, every detail, and even all of its cells disintegrated in an instant. Its fundamental structure began to appear in front of him. During this process, the creature's soul didn't react at all. Not only did it not feel anything, but it was also completely unharmed. Luo Fan carefully waved his hand and quickly found what he was looking for. A brand that it had obtained from this world. It was also the brand that was the source of its communication with the law layer. It was precisely because of this imprint that this creature had the ability to form a connection with the laws and laws. That was why it was able to continuously pour its own comprehension and inspiration into the laws and laws, even though it was still so weak. And this mark was not the mark of any living being, but the mark of the world itself. This brand also contained a kind of aura that Luo Fan felt. An incomparably familiar aura. That was his aura. Or, to be more specific, it was his aura in this space-time dimension. So this is its function. With a thought, the various mysteries within the brand were completely absorbed into his senses. In the blink of an eye, the brand no longer had any secrets in his mind. With a thought, he casually threw the brand back. Then, he raised his hand and waved it gently. The countless flames, organs, and cells that had been decomposed around him were like building blocks. They quickly reformed, and in the blink of an eye, they had already recovered to the figure that was lying on its side. It quietly appeared in front of Luo Fan, still sleeping soundly and still communicating with the law layer. It was as if nothing had happened before. Since he had found out everything he wanted to find, Luo Fan naturally didn't have any intention of staying here any longer. With a thought, he casually tore apart space-time and stepped into it, directly disappearing into the depths of this star. Then, he disappeared from this piece of space-time. When he reappeared, he had already crossed space-time and arrived at a higher space in this universe. He arrived at the place where the sky was round and the earth was square. From here, at a glance, there was the flat land spread into the endless distance. Mountains, rivers, mountains, and hills. Snow mountains, desert, ocean, grassland, forest, swamps. Almost everything that could appear in normal space-time appeared on this piece of land. However, this didn't mean that this was a normal space-time. In fact, in this piece of space-time, the structure of the terrain gave off a strange feeling. Although it was still considered natural, it vaguely gave off a feeling that the terrain was pieced together. Looking at the various inexplicable scenes in this space-time, Luo Fan's heart moved. He lifted his foot and took a light step forward. His figure had already arrived at a snow-capped mountain. This snow-capped mountain was a continuous mountain range. At the edge of this snow-capped mountain was a scorching desert. There was only a straight line between the two. However, this straight line had already separated the cold and the scorching hot. The snow water in the snow-capped mountain didn't flow into the desert at all, and the heat in the desert didn't affect the snow-capped mountain at all. It looked as if the two of them were in two completely different spaces. That's right, it's a completely different space-time. At that moment, Luo Fan suddenly came to a realization. He understood what was going on, and he also understood why there were tens of thousands of layers of space-time in this world. I didn't expect that I, who was in this space-time dimension, would come up with such a method. Sure enough, I did the right thing in traveling through so many space-time dimensions. After understanding all of this, he couldn't help but secretly praise. The reason why this layer of space-time had such a special and strange structure was very simple. It was because the rules and laws here had been completely transformed by living beings. In other words, it was the space-time that was transformed after that cultivator injected information into the rules and laws. For example, the reason why the snow-capped mountain and the desert here were incompatible was because the rules and laws in the snow-capped mountain were formed after a living being who had some understanding of the snow-capped mountain and the cold injected his own understanding into the rules and laws. Similarly, the desert next to it was also formed after a living being who had some understanding of the desert, and the scorching hot injected his own understanding into the rules and laws and transformed them. It was precisely because the fundamental reason for the formation of the two were incompatible that there was such an obvious difference between the two. That was why they didn't affect each other at all. So on and so forth. In the unknown billions of light years of space-time, every location was formed by the same principle. As for why the second layer of space-time would form such a strange structure, while in the first layer of space-time, there would not be such a special change in the universe that Luo Fan had stepped into. The fundamental reason was very simple. because the living beings in the first layer of space-time were not strong enough. Those who were strong enough to transform space-time had already ascended to a higher layer of space-time. So on and so forth. The tens of thousands of layers of space-time above should also have similar structures and similar changes. And this was obviously deliberately set up by Luo Fan in this space-time dimension. Luo Fan was very clear about the reason for this setting. This was for the inspiration of all living beings. Through this setting, he could use the wisdom of all living beings to help him understand the mysteries and help him understand the characteristics of the world. Every living being was independent. Their thinking and their inspiration could not be the same as anyone else's. And among them, even if most of them were dregs, most of them were useless to existences at Luo Fan's level. However, there was bound to be some inspiration that could be useful to him, no matter how low the probability of such useful inspiration was. As long as it wasn't zero, countless living beings and countless years had gathered together. It was bound to become extremely impressive. And this was also what Luo Fan in this space-time dimension had done. He relied on the structure of space-time to directly let the living beings completely materialize their own understanding of the rules and laws, as well as their inspiration towards the rules and laws. He let them directly change this part of the world and bear the effects of the world itself. Through this long-term, natural change, he could obtain inspiration that was helpful and enlightening to him. With a slight thought, Luo Fan's perception swept through this layer of space-time. In an instant, everything in this layer of space-time was taken into his perception. The living beings in this space-time were tens of thousands of times fewer than the living beings in the universe. However, their numbers had still reached an almost infinite level. These living beings were distributed throughout this entire layer of space-time, living in those special areas. They were cultivating. In their cultivation, they were also constantly communicating with the laws and laws. They were also constantly receiving information from the laws and laws, and they were also constantly injecting information into the laws and laws. In this kind of cultivation process, there would be some living beings obtaining new insights at every moment, and they would naturally obtain the ability to change the outside world space-time. And once they obtained such an ability, or they would naturally enter a certain area of this layer of space-time that was compatible with their understanding, or they would directly break through this layer of space-time and step into a higher layer of space-time, enter a region that was compatible with their understanding, and, generally speaking, the higher the layer of space-time, the greater the impact of their understanding on space-time, the more obvious the changes to the rules and laws would be, and so on and so forth, layer by layer, until the highest layer that layer of space-time had completely turned into countless worlds and even gave birth to countless new civilizations. And this was just the normal, step-by-step cultivation result. Once a living being obtained inspiration that a certain layer did not have, then they would naturally be able to obtain the gifts of the world and naturally open up a new region in a certain layer of space-time, becoming the ruler of that region, and obtaining the supreme divine ability of that region that was close to the God of creation. Unparalleled power. This, however, was different from the domain that one could unleash in battle. The domain that was unleashed in battle would constantly consume one's own strength and mind. But in those regions, there would not be any consumption. What an exquisite structure. Inwardly praising, Luo Fan's heart moved slightly. He tore open a layer of space-time, lifted his foot, and stepped out, stepping into the third layer of space-time. Compared to the second layer of space-time, the changes in the environment in the third layer of space-time were more abrupt, and the characteristics of the various regions were more prominent. Moreover, there were more environments that could not normally exist. This made this layer of space-time seem more mysterious and wonderful than the two layers below. His heart moved slightly, and after sensing the various aspects of this space-time, he tore open the space-time again and continued to go up. Just like that, he tore open the space-time again and again, going up again and again. After a few days, he had already arrived at this empty layer. the highest layer, he came to the place that seemed to have transformed into countless worlds. This place seemed to have become the starry sky of a universe again. Amidst the darkness, countless stars hung in the void, flickering with a faint light. However, compared to the first layer of space-time, those that were glowing here were not stars, but worlds. These worlds were regions where the law layer had already formed their own entity and were completely separated from the outside world. In other words, the special regions below had developed to the limit and reached the most perfect stage. These worlds were strange, and each of them seemed to have exerted a certain aspect to the limit. It even vaguely felt like when Luo Fan took out the 4 basic existences to build a world on their own. These worlds varied in size, and the large ones were even calculated in hundreds of millions of light years. The small ones were only a few hundred miles. The larger the world, the more powerful the creatures that distorted these laws to form the world were. Just as Luo Fan arrived here, tens of millions of worlds flickered slightly, and a wave of consciousness was emitted from those worlds, quickly condensing in the place where Luo Fan was. When he realized that these consciousnesses were condensing, Luo Fan's heart trembled, and in an instant, he had already completely eliminated his existence. Although he was standing here, he was in a state between existence and non-existence, completely isolated from all consciousnesses and perception. Following this change, the countless consciousnesses scanned the place where he was countless times, and finally, they all withdrew in shock. Their perception is actually so sharp. These are probably not inferior to level 3 Supreme Emperors. Sensing the acuity of these consciousnesses, Luo Fan could not help but be secretly shocked. Tens of millions of level 3 Supreme Emperors. This was really terrifying. Before this, he had never thought that there would be tens of millions of level 3 Supreme Emperors in a perfect world. Even the incomplete perfect world that he had entered back then should not have reached this level. Could it be that this method of construction has such a powerful effect on the cultivation of cultivators? Looking at the densely packed worlds, Luo Fan could not help but have such a thought. With this thought in mind, he frowned deeply. Chapter 1802. With a slight thought, Luo Fan lifted his foot and took a step forward. His figure instantly arrived in front of the largest world among the countless worlds. This world looked like a boundless expanse of lightning. Everything in this world was completely constructed by thunderbolts. The mountains were thunderbolts, the earth was thunderbolts, the rivers were thunderbolts, the trees were thunderbolts, and even the countless living creatures were completely condensed and constructed by thunderbolts. All the nomological laws here were fundamentally different from ordinary nomological laws, but they were independent of each other. The connection between each nomological law and nomological law was extremely tight, and there was no incompatibility between them. It felt like a naturally formed world, a world of its own. Even if such a world was released, it would definitely be regarded as a great thousand world that was extremely close to a perfect world. If it was placed in the various worlds of the Earth universe, it would definitely be a world that could give birth to cultivators who could become false saints with the true saint mysteries. However, such a world was not created. Instead, it was formed by a living creature who had forcefully injected its own information and inspiration into the nomological law layer to transform the nomological law layer. From this, one could see how powerful the powerful cultivator who had created this world was, and how powerful his ability to transform the nomological law layer was. Luo Fan's eyes flickered, and everything in this world was included in his senses. In an instant, he had already locked his gaze on the powerful existence cultivating in this world. It was a level 3 supreme sovereign realm being. At least, at this moment, in Luo Fan's eyes, the cultivator's strength was equivalent to that of a level 3 Supreme Emperor. At this moment, near the center of that world, what was going on was the same as what he had seen in the first layer of space-time. Just like that fire creature, it was sleeping near the center of this world. Its body was lying on its side among the countless thunderbolts. The thunderbolts in this world were constantly entering and exchanging with the thunderbolts that made up his body. While the thunderbolts in this world were integrated into his body, the thunderbolts in his body were also brought into this world. During this process, the laws of this world were also constantly exchanging information with him. However, compared to the other layers of space-time, here, the law layer obtained more information from his body. The amount of information that was poured into his body was almost zero. In this process, the difference between this world and the outside world became stronger and stronger. The characteristics of the lightning in this world became more and more obvious. However, this didn't mean that the cultivator would simply pay a price to change the outside world, but would not be able to improve themselves. In fact, it was the exact opposite. During this process, the cultivator was constantly making huge progress. Although he didn't obtain much information from the law layer, he still didn't understand. Every time it changed the laws of the outside world, it would naturally touch the great Tao of the entire world and touch the laws of the entire world. This touch, naturally, it would trigger the feedback of the entire world. In other words, the way he changed the laws of the outside world would either be supported, opposed, strengthened, or weakened. No matter what kind of change it would be the same. In this process, this allowed the cultivator to constantly comprehend the advantages and disadvantages of his own changes to the laws of the world. Naturally, this was the case. Naturally, he would understand his own comprehension and inspiration, whether it was beneficial to the world or harmful to the world. In this way, he would naturally be able to change in a beneficial direction and avoid harmful aspects, thus guiding him in the right direction to continuously improve and move forward. Looking at this world and the sleeping cultivator in the center of the world, Luo Fan didn't hesitate. He lifted his foot and took a step forward, passing through the barriers of this world and arriving at the center of the countless lightning bolts in this world. As a powerful existence who had already sensed the existence of the second Great Tribulation, although the surrounding world of lightning seemed incompatible with him, it ultimately didn't affect him much. He was in the center of the countless lightning bolts, but it seemed like he was in a different space-time from the surrounding lightning bolts. Any changes in the lightning bolts didn't cause any changes to his body. To outsiders, a world completely formed by lightning seemed so incredible, but to the living beings in this world, everything seemed so natural. On the contrary, living beings like Luo Fan, who were formed by flesh and blood, seemed extremely strange. The area of this world was calculated in hundreds of millions of light years. The number of living beings in this world was naturally self-evident. The number of civilizations formed by the many living beings in this world was also innumerable. It could be said that this world alone was enough to crush the Earth universe after the world had shattered. Not a bad world. Looking at the extremely tight and natural laws of this world, Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. With a thought, he grabbed an auspicious cloud formed by thunderbolts and stepped on it, allowing this auspicious cloud to carry him toward the center of this world. In other words, it was the direction of the Level 3 Supreme Emperor who had formed this world. The magic cloud formed by lightning naturally had a speed that the magic clouds in the outside world didn't have. However, such a speed was nothing in this world that was completely formed by lightning. The biggest impression that this world gave Luo Fan was that the speed in this world was many times faster than in other worlds. To be more specific, the speed of snail in this world was even comparable to that of a galloping horse in the outside world. Under such circumstances, although the magic cloud was many times faster than in the outside world, it wasn't too out of the ordinary. Although many living beings saw the magic cloud pass by as it moved forward in the void, not many of them cared about its existence. As for Luo Fan's physical form, although it was very strange to the living beings in this world, there was nothing strange about someone who could form a magic cloud in the sky. The tolerance of the living beings in this world was unimaginably strong. Naturally, no one paid much attention to him. This gave Luo Fan a rare experience. It was an experience of being in the sky like an immortal patrolling the world. After all, Luo-Fan was Luo-Fan. The speed of the magic cloud itself wasn't considered too fast in this world. However, with the support of his power, the magic cloud ultimately didn't need to travel in a straight line to its destination. Occasionally, he controlled the magic cloud to pass through time and space, crossing a distance that would normally take hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years. Just like that, in a short 3 days, he had already passed through time and space from the edge of this world and arrived at the place where the Level 3 Supreme Emperor was sleeping. Your Excellency, you've finally come. I've been waiting for you for 3 days. At this moment, a voice reached Luo-Fan's ears. Hearing this, Luo-Fan smiled slightly and said, I knew you were waiting for me. That's why it took me 3 days to get here. Hearing this, a helpless sigh came from below. Then, as lightning flashed, a huge figure made of lightning slowly stood up. This figure was extremely tall, almost tens of thousands of miles tall. Given Luo-Fan's current height, in front of this figure, he couldn't even compare to the length of a hair. After this figure appeared, it looked around and seemed to notice that something was wrong. Its figure shrank rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, it had become the same height as Luo-Fan. It appeared not far from Luo-Fan. This looks much more pleasing to the eye. Luo-Fan praised. What's your relationship with the Creator? Why do you look so similar to the Creator? At this moment, the Level 3 Supreme Emperor asked curiously. This person was slightly taller than Luo-Fan. He was skinny and had a dignified expression. There was an inexplicable sense of solemnity in his eyes. Oh, you've seen the Creator of this world? Luo-Fan's eyes lit up as he said this. After saying this, he knew that he was still lacking. The living beings in this world didn't know the Creator of this world. This was a matter of the previous space-time dimension. However, this didn't mean that this was the case in any space-time dimension. In fact, under normal circumstances, the powerful living beings knew what the Creator looked like. Knowing the Creator's power was normal. The situation in the space-time dimension that he had passed through earlier was special, that's for sure. Back then, it was because the Creator helped us pass the tribulation. This world was able to grow to this level. How could I not know him? The Level 3 Supreme Emperor said. Then how do you know that I'm not your Creator? I should be no different from him, right? Luo-Fan smiled. Although you look very similar, your essence is different. But your essence is different. I was already aware of this the moment you stepped into my world, sir, the Level 3 Supreme Emperor said. The cultivation of the cultivators in this world was different from that of other worlds. Their cultivation caused their understanding of aura and laws to be many times stronger than other living beings in other space-time dimensions. The cultivation of the cultivators in this world was different from that of the other worlds. Their cultivation made their understanding of auras, laws, and laws countless times stronger than that of other living beings in other space-time dimensions. They naturally had a much stronger understanding of the essence of cultivators than cultivators in other space-time dimensions. And after Luo-Fan stepped into this world, he didn't hide his essence too much. It was only natural that the other party could sense it, and after Luo-Fan stepped into this world, he didn't hide his essence too much. It was only natural that the other party could sense it. The specifics are too complicated. You wouldn't understand even if I told you. Luo-Fan only smiled faintly. If Sir doesn't tell me, then I have no choice but to make a move. At this moment, the Level 3 Supreme Emperor sighed. Why? Although I came here to test your strength, I was surprised that you took the initiative to make a move. Luo-Fan smiled. Although I can see that Sir is different from the Creator, but that's not necessarily the case for others. If that's the case, if Sir uses the name of the Creator to do something, then the damage will be too great. That's why I have no choice but to make a move to stop Sir. The Level 3 Supreme Emperor's expression had already become extremely stern. As he said this, the entire world started to tremble slightly. Countless bolts of lightning wrapped around this living being's body, faintly revealing countless space-time dimensions, countless worlds, and countless strange and terrifying living beings. All sorts of strange and indescribable concepts were revealed in these bolts of lightning. At this moment, an indescribable pressure appeared out of nowhere and pressed down on Luo Fan. It was as if the entire world was rejecting him. It was as if the entire world was rejecting him, as if it wanted to crush him into pieces. Although it's not bad. However, it seems to be slightly weaker than a real level 3 Supreme Emperor. Faced with this situation, such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. At this moment, the level 3 Supreme Emperor had already made his move. He let out a soft cry and raised his hand to slap at Luo Fan. Countless concepts belonging to lightning instantly condensed in front of his palm, turning into an extremely ordinary bolt of lightning. It pierced through space-time and pounced towards Luo Fan. This bolt of lightning looked so ordinary. But wherever it passed, all the rules and laws would naturally make way for it to pass. Even the laws of heaven and earth trembled slightly at this moment, similarly making way for it to pass through, allowing it to pass through more easily and swiftly. Faced with this bolt of lightning, Luo Fan couldn't help but secretly exclaim in admiration. Such a bolt of lightning had already exhausted the true meaning of concepts. If he took it out and put it back into his space-time dimension, any level 3 Supreme Emperor would not be able to dodge it. As long as they didn't have the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, they wouldn't be able to dodge it. And once they were hit, even their traces of existence would be completely wiped out. Faced with such a bolt of lightning, he just smiled faintly and casually waved his hand. In an instant, a long river rushed out from his hand. With a slight turn, it had already completely wrapped the bolt of lightning within the long river. With another tremble, it disappeared along with the bolt of lightning, instantly disappearing without a trace. You're really strong. If I didn't know that you're definitely not the creator, I would have really thought that you're the creator. The level 3 Supreme Emperor shouted. With his shout, he raised his hand and grabbed at the void in the sky. In an instant, the entire world of lightning shook violently. Endless bolts of lightning quickly condensed from every corner of the world in an instant. In the blink of an eye, they had already condensed into a hammer in his hand. A hammer that exuded eternal indestructibility. A hammer that could not be worn down by tens of thousands of tribulations. Seeing this hammer, Luo Fan's eyes couldn't help but flash. Although it was only condensed from lightning, its level had actually faintly surpassed the level of a pseudo-primordial spiritual treasure. It had a bit of a primordial spiritual treasure's charm. To be able to reach this level, this person must have obtained some kind of extremely high authority in this world to be able to do this. In an instant, such a thought flashed in his mind. Ordinary cultivators, as long as they hadn't stepped onto the path to heaven like Luo Fan. No matter how skilled they were, no matter how strong they were, it was impossible for them to create a true divine level item out of thin air. Even if it was an item that only had a bit of the charm of a true divine level item, it was still the same. This level 3 Supreme Emperor in front of him, no matter what cultivation system he cultivated, no matter what path he took, it was impossible for him to get around this restriction. Under such circumstances, he was actually able to condense this hammer that had a bit of the charm of a primordial spiritual treasure. There was only one possibility, and that was that this world was helping him. And this naturally also meant that he had obtained an extremely high authority in this world. All sorts of thoughts flashed in his mind. With a thought, countless rays of spiritual light shot out from his hands, turning into a copper mirror in the void. As it trembled slightly, it shot out a beam of light towards the hammer. When the hammer was hit by the light, it suddenly scattered. The level 3 Supreme Emperor's face instantly turned pale. Even the lightning that formed his body dissipated slightly at this moment before condensing back together. How could it be so simple? He lightly shouted. The hammer instantly condensed again, exploding with an even stronger aura than before. It brazenly smashed towards Luo Fan. At this moment, the hammer was no longer attacking in the same way as before. Instead, it was attacking with a completely solid form. although it was only a hammer that wasn't too big. As it fiercely smashed down, it was as if there were billions of worlds condensing together and pressing down. In an instant, even the world seemed to be unable to withstand this heavy pressure. Countless cracks began to spread from where the hammer passed through in all directions. These cracks weren't just in the normal space-time layer. Instead, they penetrated deep into the layer of laws and laws, causing the countless laws and laws within the layer of laws and laws to break apart. This caused more and more thunder chaos to appear in this world of thunder and lightning at this moment. From a macroscopic perspective of this entire world, it was as if something that surpassed the limits of this world had appeared in the center of this world. This pressure caused the entire world to collapse from the center in all directions. For a time, countless living beings in this world were horrified. Countless people used all sorts of methods to observe the changes occurring in the center of this world. However, only an extremely small number of living beings were able to clearly see the changes occurring here. Moreover, even if they could see it clearly, they had to pay a huge price. For a time, this entire world that was originally incomparably peaceful and tranquil fell into an indescribable chaos. Facing this hammer that was pressing down on him, Luo Fan's eyes narrowed. The simulated primordial spiritual treasure in his hands trembled slightly. Countless rays of light shot out from it and directly collided with the hammer. Chapter 1803. The moment the spiritual light came into contact with the hammer, both of them shook at the same time and were annihilated at the same time. The essence of both of them was so deep that it was unimaginable. At the same time, the destruction that leaked out during the process of annihilation instantly caused this world to collapse from the point of contact. Space-time fragments, as well as fragments of the nomological law layer, turned into smoke and spread in all directions, enveloping more and more regions, causing the entire world of lightning to gradually lose its foundation of existence. In the face of such a situation, the Level 3 Supreme Emperor only had an indescribable look of horror on his face. Endless information surged out of his body and turned into streams of nomological laws or nomological laws that directly poured into the space-time behind him. They connected with the surrounding nomological laws and layers that hadn't shattered in time and did their best to stabilize these nomological laws and obstruct the spreading smoke. This process was clearly not something that could be completed easily. Although he had already done his best, the smoke still continued to spread in all directions and engulfed more and more areas, causing them to completely shatter and completely destroy them. Fortunately, he was the creator of this world after all. His ability to control the laws and laws wasn't something that ordinary cultivators or living beings could compare to. Although he was pushed back bit by bit, his ability to resist was still getting stronger and stronger. In the end, when the destruction had spread to about 1/10 of this world, the spreading power finally stopped. The smoke finally stopped and no longer continued to spread. And this had already caused the space-time of an unknown number of light years in this world to completely collapse. An extremely terrifying hole that could cause the entire world to collapse if one wasn't careful had appeared. I see. At this moment, Luo Fan, who was in the smoke, let out a sigh. This exclamation caused the anger in the Level 3 Supreme Emperor's heart to erupt. His eyes instantly turned bloodshot. This wave of anger even turned into a physical body, forming a lightning world that stirred the surrounding smoke. At this moment, the smoke seemed like it was about to condense and form a world. At this moment, Luo Fan didn't care about his anger at all. At this moment, he truly understood why there were so many Level 3 Supreme Emperors in this space-time dimension. In fact, the true level of these Level 3 Supreme Emperors. Actually, he was only at the Fall Sage level. They might be stronger than ordinary Fall Saints, but in essence, there wouldn't be much difference. The reason why they appear to be at the level of a Level 3 Supreme Emperor was very simple. It was because of the world they had created. These worlds were not like the worlds that other cultivators had created and opened up. These worlds, it was separated from the world. A part of this world, such a world, was fundamentally different from the worlds that cultivators had created themselves. A world created by the cultivators themselves. Because it was constructed out of thin air by the cultivator, its essence was innate. Its level was also related to the cultivator's power and realm. That kind of world. Although the pioneer could receive great blessings, the blessings were actually quite small. It was only equivalent to unleashing all of its potential. Even if he seemed omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient, that was only on a certain level. There was a limit to the level he was targeting. However, this world that was separated from this part of the world was different. This kind of world that was separated from this perfect world was equivalent to dividing a part of the world's authority. They were omniscient, omniscient, and omnipotent in these worlds. That was omniscient, omniscient, and omnipotent at the level of the world's essence. The pioneer of this perfect world was Luo Fan, who had already walked on the path to heaven and surpassed the level 3 Supreme Emperor. The various omnipotent abilities brought about by this world were naturally at the level of Luo Fan. In other words, he was almost at the level of a level 3 Supreme Emperor. The reason why Luo Fan knew this now was not complicated. It was because after 1/10 of this world was damaged, the strength of the level 3 Supreme Emperor in front of him had weakened rapidly. Now, he could only barely maintain the level of a level 3 Supreme Emperor. In such a situation, if he still couldn't connect his own strength with this world, he would not be able to sense the existence of the second calamity. After understanding the source of his strength, Luo Fan no longer had any interest in this level 3 Supreme Emperor in front of him. He shook his head lightly and said, "I've had my fill. Goodbye." The level 3 Supreme Emperor was enraged by these words. Even the world of lightning around his body that was born from his anger became more than 10 times stronger at this moment. "You've had your fill? I haven't had my fill yet. Die," he roared. Countless rays of light surged from his body. The layer of laws of this entire world that he had grasped using his own information, laws suddenly began to churn. Like a rag that had been pulled, it began to gather towards the center frantically. Without holding back, it crushed towards Luo Fan, who was in the center of the smoke. The entire layer of laws of this world was being pulled. The amount of power it brought was secondary. At this moment, the originally intact appearance of this entire world was completely shattered. It was unknown how many living beings had completely collapsed at this moment, turning into basic energy that was rapidly gathering towards the center along with the law layer. Previously, nearly 1/10 of the central region had already brought about massive damage to this world, causing nearly 1/20 of the living beings in this world to die. Now that the level 3 Supreme Emperor had pulled, almost all of the remaining 19% of the living beings had died. Only a few Fall Sage level or Supreme Emperor level living beings could barely escape at the last moment and watch the changes in this world from afar. Indiscriminate destruction? Looking at this scene, Luo Fan could only sigh. This kind of attack seemed unbelievably powerful, but for him, who had already seen through the truth of this level 3 Supreme Emperor, it was nothing. It was nothing at all. With a slight thought, the copper mirror in his hand swayed slightly, and he had already constructed a door to bypass this world, allowing him to easily take a step out and leave this world. The level 3 Supreme Emperor's suicidal attack had completely missed. The level 3 Supreme Emperor let out a shrill scream at this moment. Immediately after, his body collapsed, and his life essence was instantly enveloped by a pitch-black power that was produced out of thin air. He sank into a blood-colored layer, completely disappearing in front of all living beings. Was he punished by this world? Looking at this scene, Luo Fan had an inexplicable expression on his face. He thought to himself, at this moment, countless consciousnesses crossed through space and gathered around this world, observing the various changes in this world. When they saw the level 3 Supreme Emperor being enveloped by the pitch-black power and entering the blood-colored layer, These consciousnesses all showed an inexplicable sense of panic. Amidst this panic, there were also indescribable doubts that constantly leaked out from their bodies. What's going on? Why did the Thunder Emperor suddenly destroy his own world? Why was it devoured by the abyss? This consciousness instantly spread among the many consciousnesses. A kind of bewilderment and panic gradually spread. I know, Yizichin said. At this moment, this answer came from somewhere. Following this answer, an indescribable light came from nowhere. It directly enveloped the place where Luo Fan was at. Yeah, it can actually discover me. Luo Fan was secretly curious at this moment. He already knew the nature of this light the moment he was enveloped by it. This kind of light was just a pure kind of light. At most, it could only serve as a guide, and there wasn't much else to it. As for the source of this power, although he didn't know where it came from at the beginning, with just a thought he naturally confirmed that it came from a level 3 Supreme Emperor. With a slight thought, the light instantly collapsed and could no longer envelop his body. Immediately after, he turned to look at one of the countless worlds. That world looked very ordinary at first glance, as if it was a very ordinary and normal world. However, when Luo Fan took a closer look, he realized that everything in that world was completely made up of wind. The earth was wind, the mountains were wind, the rivers were wind, the forests were wind, the beasts were wind, the humans were wind, the cultivators were wind, and even the space had a vague feeling of wind. That was a world of wind. At this moment, that world was trembling slightly, and natural disasters were occurring everywhere. It was as if the entire world could no longer maintain its balance, and all its structures were gradually collapsing. Looking at this scene, he suddenly understood why the creator of this world could discover him. That world of wind and the world of lightning that he had entered previously formed a strange symbiotic world. Although this symbiotic world didn't require the existence of the other to stabilize the two worlds, it allowed the two worlds to exist for a long time. However, it allowed the powers of the two worlds to communicate and promote each other. Through this communication and promotion, the two worlds could simultaneously sublimate and evolve at the same time. It was precisely because these two worlds had such a close connection that when the world of lightning was completely destroyed, the other world instantly sensed it and even directly received everything that happened in that world. Therefore, it was naturally able to discover Luo Fan's existence. Although Luo Fan had already extinguished the light, facing so many third-level Supreme Emperors, that instant of light was enough for them to completely lock onto Luo Fan's existence. Who the hell are you? Shouts instantly rolled towards Luo Fan from all directions. These shouts shook time and space, causing countless densely packed sound waves to form around Luo Fan's body. They interweaved and mixed together, appearing extremely strange. Faced with such a change, Luo Fan shook his head and couldn't be bothered to pay any more attention to them. With a leap, he had already stepped out of this time and space. He disappeared before everyone's eyes. Where did he go? Everyone was horrified. They had never thought that someone could actually escape from the lock of all their thoughts, and escape from their lock in a way that they couldn't grasp or control. The appearance of such a situation gave them unimaginable excitement. At this moment, an indescribable fear welled up in their hearts. Vaguely, they felt as if their views of the world were about to be overturned. Did you guys realize that that person looks a little like the creator? At this moment, a lady said. These words caused everyone to be stunned. Immediately after, just now, they recalled Luo Fan's appearance one by one, and after comparing it with the creator in their memories, they were horrified to discover the two were actually exactly the same. Very similar, but definitely not the creator. That aura doesn't belong to the creator at all. A third-level Supreme Emperor said resolutely. Indeed, the creator's aura isn't like that. Moreover, the creator wouldn't go as far as to attack the Thunder Sovereign. How dare he impersonate the creator? We must definitely find him. In the end, everyone's thoughts converged into one, and it continuously surged between the countless worlds in this final layer of time and space. This kind of surging of thoughts. Gradually, it caused the countless worlds in this time and space to slowly move, and it began to gradually turn into an extremely complicated one. An extremely mysterious formation evolution. The countless worlds had countless characteristics, and among them, there were definitely various kinds of complementary effects. The effects of mutual restraint. If such worlds could work together and combine according to a specific method, they would definitely obtain some kind of indescribable sublimation and produce a kind of originally unimaginable power. However, this was obviously impossible under normal circumstances. In any world, in any class, there would definitely be conflicts of interest, and there would definitely be conflicts. Under normal circumstances, the various fights and dirty tricks between any two cultivators would be enough to become a conspiracy epic. Therefore, it was very obvious that even if they clearly knew that the combination of all the worlds would form a kind of unimaginable power, they would obviously not work together unless there were special circumstances. It was also only at this moment, when faced with the possibility that the creator that all of them worshipped might be plotted against, that they would temporarily put aside their grudges against each other, gather all their strength, and erupt with the strongest power. This wave of power was quickly produced and gradually filled this layer of time and space. At this moment, only a few dozen breaths had passed. When this kind of power swept through the entire time and space without finding anything, they didn't need to communicate at all. They had already naturally controlled this power to break through the barrier of this time and space, and directly swept down towards the thousands of layers of time and space. At this moment, the cultivators and living beings living in the time and space below all felt an indescribable and terrifying pressure coming from the void above their heads. Under this pressure, no matter how strong the living beings were, they could clearly feel that all their secrets seemed to have been completely seen through by some existence. How could it not be? After an unknown period of time, the many level 3 supreme emperors in the highest layer of time and space were all filled with doubts. At this moment, they had already completely swept through this part of the time and space, all the worlds and all the living beings in this world, and studied them. However, during the entire process, they completely did not find the living being that pretended to be the creator in any position, in any world, or in any layer of time and space. It was as if the imposter they saw before was all just an illusion, causing them to have baseless suspicions. Since it's not here, then there are only two possibilities. The level 3 Supreme Emperor, who was the first to notice Luo Fan's existence and had locked onto him with a light beam, said. The many level 3 Supreme Emperors seemed to have understood something. At this moment, he continued, either it's in the Creator's cave abode, or it's in the blood-colored layer. Hearing this, the many level 3 Supreme Emperors fell silent. These two places had already exceeded the scope of their involvement. Naturally, there is no need to say much about the Creator's cave abode. With the Creator's abilities that were countless times stronger than theirs, how could they possibly find the cave abode? As for the blood-colored layer, although they all knew of its existence and knew how terrifying it was, however, throughout the hundreds of millions of years and countless generations of cultivators, not a single one of them had found the blood-colored layer. Under such circumstances, even if they were confident in the power of everyone's combined strength, they did not think that they could surpass all the cultivators in the past and find the blood-colored layer that no one had found. At this moment, the level 3 Supreme Emperor who had made the judgment suddenly said, I have a way to find the blood-colored layer. His words secretly surprised everyone. What method do you have? I'll sink into it, and you guys take the opportunity when it opens to find its location. These words caused the highest layer of time and space to fall into a dead silence. This method did seem to have some possibility of success. However, sinking into the blood-colored layer could be said to represent an eternity of pain and torture. They had to admit that they could not make such a decision The Level 3 Supreme Emperor who had made the decision did not wait for anyone to reply. He immediately said, "I'm going to begin. Everyone, please prepare yourselves. Don't make my efforts go to waste." Chapter 1804. This was the Level 3 Supreme Emperor destroying the world on his own. He wanted to attract heavenly punishment and enter the blood-colored layer to create an opportunity for everyone to capture the blood-colored layer. In fact, if it was just a single Level 3 Supreme Emperor, no matter how many living beings were thrown into the blood-colored layer, it would be impossible for them to discover the existence of the blood-colored layer. If it was so easy to discover, how could countless people have failed to discover the existence of the blood-colored layer over the past hundreds of millions of years? It was only at this moment that the tens of millions of Level 3 Supreme Sovereigns joined forces to investigate the blood-colored layer. Whether it was in terms of strength or methods, they were far from what a single Level 3 Supreme Sovereign could compare to. Only then would they have a chance to investigate it clearly, seeing how the Level 3 Supreme Emperor destroyed his own world so decisively. The other Level 3 Supreme Emperors were filled with admiration. They began to focus their energy to communicate with the other Level 3 Supreme Emperors and began to prepare their strongest means to capture the blood-colored layer. As more and more of the world was destroyed, the degree of destruction became more and more thorough. Gradually, all kinds of oppressive feelings began to condense above the world and quickly surge towards a certain Level 3 Supreme Emperor that existed in that world. At the same time, in that world, countless cultivators began to rush out of that world in a frenzy, trying their best to escape that world. These living beings were like the living beings of other worlds, but their attributes were extremely extreme. The only world that they could truly exist in perfectly was the world that they were born in. In other words, the world formed by wind that was currently collapsing. In other worlds, no matter how similar the nature of the world was, it would bring all kinds of terrifying damage to them, causing those living beings to unknowingly dissipate. It could even be transformed into some kind of special power, fusing with the world and becoming a certain landscape of the world. Only extremely powerful living beings could do this. Only beings above the pseudo-sage level could break free from this kind of intrinsic shackles and avoid all the damage caused by the changes in the outside world. Only then could they continue to exist in the normal space and time of the outside world. When other worlds were destroyed, this kind of restriction was equivalent to having no effect. After all, only pseudo-sage beings could truly transcend the world during the process of the world's destruction. However, at this moment, the world formed by the wind was different. Because this world was destroyed by the Level 3 Supreme Emperor on purpose to sacrifice himself, he opened up the right to leave this world during the process of destruction. This allowed living beings that were not powerful enough to be at the pseudo-sage level to have the ability to leave that world. Therefore, at this moment, although countless living beings were escaping from that world, but most of them turned into whirlwinds after leaving that world and began to splatter parts of their bodies in all directions. In the end, there were living beings that were trying to escape dying at every moment. They were completely devoured by the normal space-time. As for the living beings that weren't devoured, they couldn't continue to stay on this space-time plane. Instead, under the effects of the laws of the heavens and earth, they began to sink down continuously, sinking into a space-time layer that was suitable for them to live in. One by one, they disappeared before the eyes of the Level 3 utmost emperors. Such a situation caused the situation to be extremely chaotic, but the place quickly regained its peace. Those creatures that might be angry, might cry bitterly, and might even become violent because of this did not stop at this space-time plane. However, these things were obviously secondary to the Level 3 Supreme Emperors. At this moment, they were staring at the third-grade Supreme Emperor who remained in this layer of space-time after the world was destroyed. At this moment, the third-grade Supreme Emperor's body was already surrounded by an incomparably dense, pitch-black energy. This pitch-black energy was so terrifying that any Level 3 Supreme Emperor who saw it would feel their hearts tremble. An indescribable sense of wariness welled up in their hearts, and they were extremely worried that the pitch-black energy would approach them and contaminate them. Under this pitch-black energy, a blood-colored line appeared in the void. The blood-colored layer is about to open. One of the third grade Supreme Emperors shouted at this moment. As he shouted, everyone got into action. Everyone got into action, and their wills merged together in the void. They began to carry out an extremely mysterious construction, gradually forming a powerful consciousness that was countless times stronger than any other living being. This consciousness, the level of the present, had already surpassed the level of a third-grade Supreme Emperor. Faintly, there was a kind of eternal and indestructible aura leaking out from it. When this consciousness appeared, the entire space-time of the highest layer began to distort inexplicably. Faintly, countless sceneries, countless lights, and even countless worlds were formed under this consciousness. These various changes caused the space-time of the highest layer, which originally looked like a starry cosmos, to transform into a world with a round sky and a square earth. However, compared to an ordinary world, this world was indescribably strange. The various contradictory lights and shadows fused together seamlessly, giving off an inexplicable sense of nature. Sensing this consciousness that was countless times stronger than their own, all the third-grade Supreme Emperors felt an indescribable sense of confidence surge in their hearts at this moment. Immediately, this consciousness began to drown that blood-colored thread under the combined efforts of everyone. At the same time, that blood-colored thread began to gradually grow larger, gradually splitting into two and separating. In between those two blood-colored threads, a blood-colored space-time appeared, or rather, a blood-colored layer. An extremely violent, ferocious, and tragic aura leaked out from it. Although this aura wasn't too strong, just this bit of aura alone was enough to make the space-time of the highest layer somewhat unable to withstand it. Faintly, all the third-grade Supreme Emperors could feel that this layer of space-time was withstanding an indescribably terrifying pressure. It was as if this layer of space-time was going to break apart in the next instant, creating a passageway or hole that led to the next layer of space-time. What a terrifying, blood-colored layer. At this moment, similar thoughts flashed through everyone's minds. However, since things had already come to this, they naturally couldn't back down. Immediately, they took advantage of this opportunity. They directly channeled the consciousness that everyone had formed with the help of the world's formation into that blood-colored layer. This crack produced an extremely shocking suction force, directly acting on the third-grade Supreme Emperor who was enveloped by the black energy below. Although that third-grade Supreme Emperor had sacrificed himself, obviously, he wasn't going to sit and wait for death. His self-sacrifice was only to open up that blood-colored layer. Now that the blood-colored layer had already opened up in front of everyone, there was naturally no need for him to proceed to the next step and be sucked into that blood-colored layer. At this moment, he unleashed his powerful might and terrifying strength and began to rapidly attack the surrounding black energy, wanting to escape the suction force of that blood-colored layer. But this was obviously of little use. It was easy to invite a god in, but it was difficult to send him away. That blood-colored layer wasn't something that one could enter and leave at will. Since it had already been opened, how could it possibly disappear if it didn't suck in the living beings it wanted to suck in? The suction force didn't decrease. Instead, it increased tremendously, causing the third-grade Supreme Emperor, who was enveloped by the black energy, to be sucked into the crack that had opened up on the blood-colored layer. Gradually, he was sucked into it, disappearing before the eyes of the third-grade Supreme Emperors. Simply, this person didn't really have high hopes after all. Although his efforts were in vain, he was still sucked into that blood-colored layer. But in the end, he didn't let out any screams, and there wasn't much fear on his face either. I didn't expect you to have such a sacrificial spirit. Truly admirable. At this moment, a voice rang in the ears of the third-grade Supreme Emperors. Following this voice, they saw a figure appear at the exit of that blood-colored layer, or rather, the entrance. It was a figure that looked extremely similar to the creator of this world. That was obviously Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan was in the blood-colored layer, looking at the scene outside the crack, and sensing the will of a third-grade Supreme Emperor that had reached in through the crack. In an instant, he already knew what was going on, and his emotions couldn't help but become rather complicated. It's not just my appearance that has been exposed. I've actually become the public enemy of this world, and they're even willing to pay the price of never being able to reincarnate to deal with me. Such a thought flashed through his mind. He had left that layer of space-time previously. He had entered the blood-colored layer of this world. The blood-colored layer of this world was an extremely mysterious place. This place wasn't actually in that world. It was in fact in the gap between that world and the state of chaos. The reason for its existence was obviously because Luo Fan, who had been in this space-time dimension, had modified this gap and formed it. In this place, everything looked completely different from a gap. It was completely blood-colored, but that was only on the surface. In reality, the essence of this place was still a place where time and space were in absolute chaos. It was a state between the state of heaven and the state of chaos. Any living being that entered this place, as long as they couldn't see through the essence of this place, would not be able to transcend this place. No matter how strong they were, they could only endure the punishment that this place imposed on them. Moreover, it was precisely because this was the gap between the state of heaven and the state of chaos that any cultivator whose worldview didn't include the existence of such a gap would not be able to discover its existence. This was the fundamental reason why this world had existed for so many hundreds of millions of years, and despite so many intelligent and powerful cultivators, none of them had been able to discover the existence of this blood-colored layer. It was so much so that even at this moment, they had already fused their intents together to probe this place, but they still couldn't see anything clearly. They couldn't see the countless living beings in this blood-red layer. Only Luo Fan and the others, who were directly exposed, could barely see them. Found him. Many of the Level 3 Supreme Emperors were excited and furious when they saw Luo Fan's existence. Immediately, the will formed by the Level 3 Supreme Emperors through the formation of the world began to change frantically. Countless terrifying powers were summoned from these will changes, and they pounced towards Luo Fan in a frenzy, trying to annihilate him completely. It had to be said that the combined power of so many Level 3 Supreme Emperors was truly terrifying. Under normal circumstances, even Luo Fan would have to summon the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light in the face of so many attacks. He could use its power to resist and eliminate them. However, it was clear that this was not a normal situation. At this moment, he was in the gap between the state of heaven and the state of chaos. In the eyes of the Level 3 Supreme Emperors, this was a place that didn't exist. How could a cultivator hit something that they didn't think existed? Since they felt that the place where Luo Fan was it didn't exist, they naturally couldn't charge into this place to attack him. Therefore, at this moment, all Luo Fan had to do was stand there, and the attacks had already passed through his body directly. It was as if they had passed through a shadow, and they didn't cause him any harm at all. How is this possible? This was the most common sentence that other living beings would say to Luo Fan, but it was said again at this time. Many Level 3 Supreme Emperors looked at Luo Fan in disbelief. That person was clearly there, right at the entrance of the blood-colored plane. However, the terrifying attacks that all of them had unleashed together had no effect on him at all. The sense of defeat brought about by this was enough to make some of the weak-willed people collapse. Even though these Level 3 Supreme Emperors all had hearts of steel, many of their expressions changed, and fear appeared in their eyes. Luo Fan looked at them and shook his head indifferently. He said, "You don't have to attack me like this. We'll mind our own business. You don't have to worry that I'll harm you or your creator. I'm not afraid of you using any means to deal with me, so you should just give up." Hearing this, many Level 3 Supreme Emperors had a look of shock and doubt in their eyes. If it was before, they would naturally scoff at Luo Fan's words. But at this time, after showing that he wouldn't suffer any damage no matter how they attacked him, How would they still dare to treat Luo Fan as someone who would speak without thinking? Every word that he said, they naturally had to think of a way to refute it. If you don't have any ill intentions, why don't you show your true face? One of the level 3 Supreme Emperors shouted coldly. Hearing this, Luo Fan sighed and said, I'm explaining to you not because I'm afraid of you, or because I want to explain anything to you. It's just that I can't be bothered. As he spoke, without hesitation, he slapped out with his hand. In an instant, his palm passed through the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. It arrived at the corresponding position of the level 3 Supreme Emperor's world and pressed down slightly. That palm had already passed through the barrier and reached into that world. It appeared in front of the level 3 Supreme Emperor and slapped hard on the body of the level 3 Supreme Emperor. Boom! With a loud bang, the level 3 Supreme Emperor's body was instantly destroyed. At the same time, a blood-colored crack suddenly appeared behind him, sucking in the remaining life force. The combined power of all the level 3 Supreme Emperors was shockingly strong. Even if it was Luo Fan, he would have to rely on the power of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light if he were to face them head-on. However, that was only their combined power. To him, any one of them was just an ant. At this time, with the gap between heaven and earth in the state of chaos, it was extremely easy for him to hit a specific person among them. Many of the level 3 Supreme Emperors were shocked and furious at this moment. How dare you? Loud shouts erupted, and countless forces rushed towards Luo Fan's position, wanting to annihilate him completely. The same process from before happened again. Luo Fan still didn't resist at all. He stood there quietly, but the countless forces didn't hurt him at all. They didn't affect him in the slightest. That's all I have to say. What you choose is your own business. But next time, I won't be so polite, Luo Fan said calmly as he looked at them. As he spoke, he swiped his hand, and the entrance to the blood-colored layer was completely closed. Everything about him disappeared from the senses of the level 3 Supreme Emperors. Luo Fan didn't care what those level 3 Supreme Emperors would choose. At this moment, he had already arrived at a certain position in the gap between heaven and earth in the state of chaos. This place was divided into 3 sides. One side was the barrier that was adjacent to the state of chaos. The other side was the barrier that was adjacent to the previous world. The remaining side was the barrier that was adjacent to the Earth's universe. In other words, this place, from a macroscopic perspective, was the place where the world he had created in this space-time dimension intersected with the Earth's universe. Of course, this kind of 3-sided barrier wasn't in the form of the normal 3 sides of space-time. Instead, it existed in a more mysterious and complicated way. Here, any 2 of the 3 sides of the barrier were facing each other from afar. They were placed before Luo Fan in an indescribable way that couldn't be constructed normally. And here, there was a small space-time. Within it, he could clearly feel his aura in this space-time dimension. Obviously, this was his cave abode in this space-time dimension. In other words, the 2 places that the level 3 Supreme Emperors had originally determined that Luo Fan might be and were actually the same place. Chapter 1805. With a slight movement of his heart, the various structures of the cave abode in front of him had already entered his senses. There's a defense. Sensing the cave abode, his heart trembled. The cave abode in front of him had an extremely tight and powerful defense. This defense contained the fundamental power of this world. If someone didn't know how to break through it, once they entered, it would be equivalent to being lost in millions of layers of space-time, and it would be difficult for them to escape. Although this was set up by him in another space-time dimension, the fundamental power contained in it was completely different from what he understood. Or rather, the fundamental worldview was completely different from his worldview. The 2 were so different that they didn't seem to be the same person at all. It's actually so different from the 2 I encountered last time. The worldview is really mysterious and unpredictable. Sensing the nature of the worldview revealed in this defense, Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. Although there were some differences between the selves in different space-time dimensions, they all developed from the same beginning, after all. Their fundamentals were definitely extremely similar, and the differences were definitely extremely small. However, such an extremely small difference, or perhaps just a little different thought, a few different thoughts, and a few different stimuli would ultimately result in such a huge difference in the worldview that was ultimately born. In fact, it might even reach a completely different level. This situation was something that he could not have imagined before. Let me see what kind of worldview I have in this space-time dimension. Red type equals page split number equals 1/. With this thought flashing through his mind, Luo Fan crashed into the defense without hesitation. The cave abode didn't change at all during this process. The moment Luo Fan crashed into it, there was only a circle of ripples that spread out, and there were no other changes. It didn't feel like someone who had already sensed the second Great Tribulation had entered, but more like a subtle change brought about by a gentle breeze blowing through this defense. After this, everything returned to normal. And in this blood-red dimension, which was the gap between this world and the state of chaos, in the highest space-time, the many Level 3 Supreme Emperors were initially in chaos for hundreds of years, but in the end they gradually calmed down. Everything gradually returned to the original situation before Luo Fan appeared. It seemed as if nothing had happened at that time. Time passed slowly during this process. In the blink of an eye, 10,000 years had passed. On this day, in the blood-red plane, which was the gap between heaven and earth in the state of chaos, a heartbeat that was getting louder and louder came from a place where 3 barriers formed a system in a mysterious way. Along with this heartbeat, the barrier around the cave began to fluctuate. These fluctuations were like circles of ripples that were constantly being born, constantly spreading, and continuously dissipating. As the heartbeat became faster and faster, the ripples increased in number and density. Finally, at a certain moment, when the heartbeat reached a certain limit, the ripples made the entire space-time seem as if it was completely fluctuating. The next moment, the ripples seemed to have stopped. At this moment, countless figures gradually appeared in various parts of the barrier. These silhouettes seemed to be coming from an invisible place, constantly approaching the barrier, constantly approaching the vibrating layer formed by countless ripples. The appearance of these figures was impressively Luo Fan's appearance. At this moment, as these countless Luo Fan constantly approached the outermost barrier, they constantly overlapped and fused, and their numbers kept decreasing. Finally, at a certain moment, all of their numbers finally merged into one. At this moment, the ripples on the barrier that originally covered the entire cave had completely shrunk and fused into one, turning into circles of ripples that appeared on the barrier in front of Luo Fan. Then, Luo Fan's figure gradually stepped out, and more parts of him gradually walked out of the center of the ripples, gradually appearing in the blood-red plane. When Luo Fan really stepped out of the barrier, the ripples on the barrier had unknowingly disappeared, as if they didn't exist. At this moment, Luo Fan had a smile on his face, thinking to himself, I finally found the root. I didn't expect my worldview to be like this in this space-time dimension. At this moment, the feeling of power that lingered around his body had grown a lot more than before. Moreover, in his heart, he originally felt that the second tribulation would only arrive after 10 billion years, but now it had shrunk to more than 9 billion years. In this situation, red type equals page split number equals 3/. Obviously, it was not because hundreds of millions of years had passed compared to the last time he sensed it, but because his strength had improved and his realm had increased. As a result, the attraction to the second tribulation had also increased. In the end, the time for the second tribulation had been brought forward. Sensing the advance of the second tribulation, Luo Fan secretly rejoiced. Although the second tribulation was terrifying, it was a stepping stone for him to improve and support him to become a true sage. In addition, the 8th Great Tribulation of the Earth's universe would arrive in just over 3 billion years. If he couldn't achieve a fundamental breakthrough before then, he probably wouldn't be able to escape from that Great Tribulation. Therefore, he was looking forward to the arrival of the second Great Tribulation as soon as possible. In fact, in his opinion, He wanted the next 8 great tribulations to arrive as soon as possible. This was what he wanted. It's time to leave now. Looking back at the cave abode that he had never entered before, Luo Fan thought to himself. At this moment, he had already comprehended the mysteries of the worldview contained in the defense around the cave abode. Therefore, the defense of the cave abode was already meaningless to him. Under such circumstances, if he wanted to enter the cave dwelling, it would be an extremely simple matter. However, it was obvious that it was meaningless for him to enter the cave abode now. He had come to this space-time dimension to comprehend his worldview in this space-time dimension, and thus provide impetus for the improvement of his worldview. Under such circumstances, he had already passed through this screen. Red type equals page split number equals for / since he had gained a huge harvest. Why would he need to enter the cave abode again? After making up his mind, he no longer hesitated. With a slight thought, inexplicable shadows naturally appeared around his body. These shadows constructed a special space-time dimension and space-time dimension. As these two dimensions gradually took shape, his body began to emit an inexplicable mystery, and his figure gradually became blurry. Not long after, his figure had completely disappeared from the blood-colored layer. This space-time dimension had completely lost his figure. For a time, the entire blood-colored layer fluctuated slightly. This fluctuation penetrated into the cave abode that Luo Fan had spent a lot of time exploring in a very wonderful way. Then, through the various subtle changes in the cave abode, it was directly transmitted into the normal space-time, causing countless living beings in the normal space-time to instantly sense some inexplicable changes appearing in a place that they were unaware of. Only those with extremely sharp intuition could guess that some kind of living being that posed a great threat to this world had finally left this world. Luo Fan naturally did not care about the changes in the space-time dimension after he left. At this moment, he had the feeling of leaving the previous space-time dimension and once again fell into the inexplicable fog. Then, the fog changed, and his figure once again entered another space-time dimension. Compared to the previous 2 space-time dimensions, this space-time dimension did not have too many characteristics. Compared to the perfect world that he had created, it was even more similar. Therefore, in this space-time, dimension red type equals page split number equals 5 / among them. Luo Fan did not stay for too long. In just a few years, he had already comprehended everything he wanted to comprehend, and the arrival of the second catastrophe was only brought forward by a few million years. Then, he left that space-time dimension. Just like that, in the next few million years, Luo Fan moved between space-time dimensions one after another. During this time, he mostly encountered the space-time dimension that did not have a different space-time dimension. However, there were also many times when he encountered himself in a different space-time dimension. Of course, many times when he encountered himself in a different space-time dimension, none of them belonged to that space-time dimension. In other words, they were the same as him, leaving from their own space-time dimension and entering it. This kind of encounter was obviously a small probability event. For both sides, this was a kind of opportunity. Through communication, both sides would benefit greatly. As for whether they could communicate or not, it was simply nonsense. Although it was a different space-time dimension, they were all Luo Fan. Even if there were some differences between them, the essence of the heart to pursue Tao was definitely there. How could they let go of such a great opportunity to improve? Just like that, until now, after more than 3 million years after entering the misty space, Luo Fan had already improved a lot compared to before. The most obvious manifestation was that according to his senses, the arrival of the second catastrophe had been brought forward from more than 9 billion years to 900 million years ago. It was almost 10 times ahead of time. Although 900 million years was still quite a long time, it was already within the range that Luo Fan could accept. Red type equals page split number equals 6 / At this time, Luo Fan had already appeared in the misty space. The space-time dimension around his body was already extremely compatible with him. However, because he had yet to become a true sage it was still not perfect. Although it was not perfect because he had not become a true sage yet, it was already enough for him to leave this misty space at will. In other words, at this moment, he was no longer like before, unable to resist being sucked into a different space-time dimension. Instead, he could keep himself in this misty space. If it were me, I would have thought of it. At this moment, such a thought appeared in Luo Fan's mind as he floated in this misty space. With this thought in mind, he slowly closed his eyes and began to send out his senses to carefully sense something. Just like this, more than 300 years passed. During these 300 years, he did not move at all, like a statue that had been thrown into this misty space. In fact, he could not even sense the existence of vitality in his body. After more than 300 years, at a certain moment, Luo Fan's body trembled, and he suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were locked onto a position in this misty space. Found it. With this thought in mind, he took a step forward without hesitation and released the space-time dimension around his body that was extremely compatible with him. His body was naturally affected by the rules of this misty space, and with a shake, he disappeared without a trace. He had already entered a different space-time dimension. When he came back to his senses, he had already appeared in a boundless expanse of grayish existence. When he saw Zhou Owei's misty space clearly, red type equals page split number equals 7/ with the existence of misty space, Luo Fan already knew where he was. This was a gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos in a certain space-time dimension. His heart moved slightly, and he turned his gaze over. Amidst the endless grayish existences, there were tens of thousands of figures floating in the air. There are actually so many different space-time dimensions that I have reached this step. Seeing these figures clearly, Luo Fan could not help but reveal an inexplicable smile. It was unknown how many figures were densely packed together, but each of them looked extremely similar to Luo Fan. From a certain point of view, they could even be said to be exactly the same. It was only because of the different paths they took and the subtle differences caused by the differences in their worldviews that made them different from Luo Fan. Obviously, these figures were all different space-time dimensions of Luo Fan. Moreover, they were among the countless Luo Fan in the countless space-time dimensions who had already escaped from the misty space and would no longer be pulled into another space-time dimension by the rules of the misty space. When Luo Fan appeared here, the countless Luo Fan that existed in the different space-time dimensions swept their gazes over. After seeing Luo Fan clearly, there was a kind of joy in their eyes, and they all smiled at Luo Fan. Looking at the countless similar smiles, Luo Fan could not help but have a strange feeling and involuntarily smiled as well. After this smile, they turned their heads again and once again fell into the state that seemed to be in deep thought, as if they were deducing some kind of magic power or some kind of principle. Luo Fan was no exception. They were all Luo Fan from different space-time dimensions. It could be said that they were all egos. Red type equals page split number equals 8/ who didn't understand. It could even be said that their minds were completely connected. Things like small talk and small talk naturally did not need to appear between them. Although there was no passage of time in this dusky existence, everyone had their own time dimension. Next, from time to time, there would be a different space-time dimension that Luo Fan sensed. This space-time dimension that emitted all kinds of summoning auras would appear in the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos by adjusting the surrounding space-time dimension. In this way, after another 100 years, the situation changed in Luo Fan's senses. The number of Luo Fans that appeared in the different space-time dimension gradually stopped increasing. After a few years, when there were no more Luo Fans that appeared in the different space-time dimension, Luo Fan sighed. Can only 138 million egos transcend in this space-time dimension? According to the normal frequency, there should be a different space-time dimension where Luo Fans would enter this space-time dimension in a few days at the very least. Now that no one had entered for a few years, it clearly meant that among the countless space-time dimensions, there were only so many Luo Fans that could freely enter this space-time dimension at this stage. Although this seemed to be an extremely considerable number, in the unknown billions of space-time dimensions, this number was obviously extremely insufficient. The numerous Luo fans glanced at each other at this time. In an instant, everyone knew what the others were thinking. At this moment, they were in no mood to talk nonsense. One by one, including Luo fans, figure completely disappeared. Red type equals page split number equals 9 / What replaced it was the materialization of their worldview that was transformed from their own life source. In an instant, 138 million extremely mysterious worlds appeared in the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. They were densely packed and distributed, pushing aside the gray existences within, making this place seem like a cosmic void filled with stars. It seemed so gorgeous, so dreamy, and so incredible. These countless spacetimes that were transformed from the worldview were extremely wonderful. Each spacetime had its own characteristics. No matter how similar each spacetime was to other spacetimes, there were some differences in essence. More than 100 million spacetimes appeared here at the same time, making every Luo fan feel that a monstrous feast had been placed in front of them. At this time, every Luo fan didn't hesitate to absorb all kinds of mysteries from the countless worldviews around them. They experienced the characteristics of all kinds of worldviews and worked hard to make their own worldviews grow and perfect through the stimulation of all kinds of worldviews. Luo fans who could come here, no matter which space-time dimension they were from, were the kind of Luo fan who had cultivated their worldviews to an extremely perfect level. Any of the space-times that were materialized by them was extremely perfect. It could even be said that they were extremely perfect space-times that contained infinite principles and endless mysteries. However, not a single Luo fan could say that any of the space-times was too inferior and could not comprehend the mysteries. Every Luo fan was gradually immersed in these more than 100 million worldviews. The passage of time, the various misty spacetimes, and the various things in the spacetime. Red type equals page split number equals 10 /